Sarah Adams, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So you have to be, you are the number one requested return guest we've ever had.
Crazy.
Last episode, actually it was 2 episodes, right? We dove into Benghazi, some of the corruption behind it, and took off like a bat out of hell. It was insane to see that growth. And then we got censored.
Welcome to my life.
Yeah, right? So I don't know why we got censored, but, anyways, we can't rank for your name. It's really odd. For those of that are listening, if you go to YouTube, you can type in Sarah Adams, Shawn Ryan Show, and it's like, 30 pages down the line. You can't even find it. You literally have to go to the channel to find it. So we're going to call you by your old call sign over at CIA, which is...
Superbad.
Superbad. So if you're looking for this on YouTube, it's under Superbad now. Hopefully they don't censor this one. I don't know why they would have censored the last one.
Yeah, well, if they censor the last one, they will censor this one.
I know, right? Yeah, but we don't get censored on audio, so that's awesome. But so a couple of things since the last one. Have developed. We're going to talk about a lot of things, but you are still tracking a lot of the terrorist organizations. We're going to talk about who's coming up through the southern border, what you think they're doing inside the U.S., a lot of the ISIS stuff, and it's going to be, I know you have some very pertinent information that needs to be released, and man, I just can't wait to dig into it. But I got a question for you.
Sure.
So, did you read the comments on our last interview?
So, I know some of the comments because I have an all-male team at work, and they spit out random lines from the comments now to me, and I realized, that must be a comment under the Shawn Ryan YouTube video. So, I've heard many of them.
Lots of questions. I think the number one question from males is, are you single?
Love it.
I've never seen so many marriage proposals in a YouTube comment section.
I can't believe the age I am. I've yet to have a marriage proposal, but they all came on YouTube, apparently. So, I'm single, but as you know, I'm married to my terrorist, and I'm tracking my terrorist, and that's a priority in my life. I don't have time for foolishness.
You don't have time for dating, Pen. Got it. Well, sorry, fellas, that's a heartbreaker. But anyways... You don't really need an introduction because you've been on here before, but I'm going to give you one anyways. So you are the co-author of Benghazi, Know Thy Enemy, a cold case investigation, former CIA officer during the Libyan crisis, before, during, and after 9/11 attacks, counterterrorism analyst, and CIA targeter. Senior advisor on the Select Committee of Benghazi. So, am I missing anything?
No, pretty much everyone knows what I do at this point.
Yeah. The word is out, but
yes.
So, last time you came on, I gave you a gift.
Yes.
It was the Laird Superfoods Performance Mushrooms.
Okay, let's see what we got here.
This time it's something a little different.
Oh yes, nice. Ooh, of course a sticker. That's
there
lovely.
You go.
Whenever you can get free promos.
But the good stuff.
Thank you. And what people don't know is I went home with gummy bears last time, and they were also delicious.
That's right.
But since everybody gets a gift on the show, this is from Boone and I.
Oh, man, no way.
Yes. And we like that one because it's kind of like the targeting one.
Oh, dude, thank you.
So I hope you enjoy.
This is awesome.
Yeah.
I might frame this and put it in the museum here.
Go for it, man.
That's all. Thank you so much. But
just don't do it with a big picture of my face. That would be very weird.
I promise I won't.
Thank you.
But real quick, so you know this, we have a Patreon account. They're our top supporters. They're the reason I get to sit here and you get to sit here, and they've been with us since the beginning. So one of the things I do is I offer them a question in the interview. Okay. And so we got a couple of good ones here. The first one is from Leo, and his question is, what type of attacks and locations do you foresee these terrorists choosing?
Sure. Well, hi, Leo. Thanks for reaching out. Now, the interesting part is I don't think a lot has changed on what terrorists want to attack, right? Like they want to hit soft targets. They want to embarrass governments or whomever their enemy is, right? And they want to make a lot of things seem it was inspired by them, right? Even just in the last couple of weeks, we've seen lone wolf videos come out from Al-Qaeda, then Al-Qaeda in the Arab Peninsula and ISIS, right? And they're like, hey, go do things inspired by us. So they still want to kind of get a lot of people involved to kind of like plus up their numbers, right? And make them seem bigger than they are and more powerful than they are. Another thing I think we really need to stay focused on too is attacks on embassies and consulates. The terrorists have seen, hey, that's a quick and easy way to push the U.S. government out of a location. And so I think that's going to go back to the old days, like we saw some big ones in the 90s. And I think they're probably planning now the same type of thing.
Do you think are there any specific embassies you think they're going to target?
Yes.
Do you want to say?
I think one is the U.S. Embassy in Bamako in Mali, and then I think the other one is on the Saudi Peninsula.
Why do you think that?
Because they are working on it.
They are. Roger that. Roger that.
So.
And what you'd mentioned the lone wolf videos. What came out recently? What specific lone wolf videos are you referring to? Yeah,
it's just basically the different terrorist groups saying, hey, go do attacks that are inspired by us. One of the more popular ones that's out right now is ISIS put one out to do with the Paris Olympics. So they said, hey, go to where crowds are in Paris. We don't care if you use a knife. We don't care if you use a vehicle. Like, cause havoc and attack these crowds surrounding the Olympic events. So they're asking people to just go do things. And then obviously they're probably planning things too. So they want to have a large number of attacks if they can bring in these inspired people.
Where are they sending out this messaging?
Most of it goes out in Telegram is the best place to get at least ISIS messaging.
Okay. Wow. The next question is from Brody. In your opinion, are we more likely to suffer an attack on infrastructure like power grid, water supply, etc., or an attack on human life or soft targets?
Yeah.
What group is most likely to and has the resources to pull off such an attack?
Sure. Brody, you did us wrong in Homeland, but I'll answer your question anyway. Have you seen Homeland?
No.
It's like the best show. Anyway, so yeah, Brody just becomes like a bad guy, that's all. And then the Iranians hang him. So sorry if you haven't seen the TV show, I just ruined Brody for you. But anyway, so it's almost two different things, right? Like the terrorists focus on the soft targets. It's almost like the nation state in the near peer who focus on what we would call the infrastructure, the power grid, etc. So it's actually two very different threats, but they're both very active threats, right? Because like, let's say if we were going to go to war with China, well, if they have now taken control of large portions of our electric grid, large portions of our ports, right? They can shut all that down and prevent us from responding to situations. So it's like you almost have to look at terrorism in a different lens, right? When you kind of look at the nation state level. So I do think both are a threat, but they're from different actors.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. All right. Let's get into the interview then. I know you have a lot to cover. I have personal questions from you or for you, but actually we did forget to talk about the newsletter. So I just love the information. I don't love the information, but you're one of the only people that are out there reporting real info and on some of the threats that we face and about the terrorist organizations. So we spoke last night at dinner, and you're going to be given a down and dirty intel brief on all things terrorists in the Shawn Ryan Show newsletter. So if you guys are interested and you want to keep up to date on what Sarah's tracking and some of the stuff going on within the terrorist world, sign up for the Shawn Ryan Show newsletter.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. I mean, I joke a lot about terrorism, but obviously it is a serious threat, and we do have a major problem getting information out on what the terrorists are doing right now.
Yeah. So when we reconnected, well, we've always kind of stayed connected, but you had brought up we were kind of talking about all the terrorists that are coming up through the southern border and maybe even the northern border. But I mean, you've been tracking these guys. You know they're coming across. We had spoken about how some of these organizations are becoming friendlies who in the past years have been kind of rivals or not friends with each other, grouping together to become a common enemy. You had brought up the fact that a lot of these organizations are now training in urban warfare overseas, which we had spoke offline about, that you thought that was going to become a threat to the embassies. Now here we are. And so let's start with how are these organizations and which ones are becoming allies?
Sure. Yeah. The really interesting thing is the terrorists have been coming together for a long time. We just really hadn't been collecting it because how the U.S. government works is all the terrorist groups are in a bucket, right? So this is ISIS. ISIS people work ISIS. This is Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda people work ISIS. This is Hamas. Really, no one worked Hamas. And nobody was working cross-functionally like, hey, how are these terrorists sharing monetary resources? How are they doing joint training? A really good example is now these Hamas attacks just happened in October, right? Well, a large number of the terrorists at that attack trained in southern Afghanistan. They were in Uruzgan and Kandahar at al-Qaeda camps in the months prior to the Hamas attack. So if we had been collecting on what's al-Qaeda doing in southern Afghanistan, why are all these Palestinian terrorists in Afghanistan? This is very strange. We might have been able to get ahead of an attack like that. But because we put them in buckets, nobody thinks Hamas would go to Afghanistan to train, right? Because they're like, well, they're not aligned with Al-Qaeda, and they're Shia and they're Iran. And people ignore the fact that, Al-Qaeda and Iran have been super close because it's Iran, in addition to Pakistan, where all the Al-Qaeda senior leaders stayed these last 20 years when we were hunting them or trying to hunt them, unsuccessfully inside Afghanistan, right? So the terrorists have been coming together. We've just failed to notice it. And then, we talk a lot about in Libya, Al-Qaeda and ISIS came together because they had a mutual enemy, which was the Libyan National Army. And actually, just a couple months ago, one of our most senior terrorists from the Benghazi attacks, his name is Hashim Abu Sidra, was detained in Libya. The interesting part is it hasn't made the U.S. press. But what's really interesting about him? At the time he was detained, he was the head of ISIS in Libya, and he was the head of the operational side of Al-Qaeda in Libya. So see how this is now against narratives, right? He was basically the operational head of two groups that you're told don't work together.
Whoa. Well, how are you getting this information, if you don't mind me asking?
I mean, we've been working in Libya for 9 years. We have obviously a lot of relationships. We are kind of the only ones who work Benghazi, so we actually have a lot of people even just proactively reach out to us now too and say, hey, here's what's happening. So he's detained. He's actually a forthcoming detainee. He's providing a lot of info. The really interesting part is, from what I'm hearing, is they're only focusing his detainee debriefings on ISIS. They're not at all discussing the Al-Qaeda side, which is fascinating because, when he did our Benghazi attacks, he was, of course, Al-Qaeda, and he was leading actually one of the big battalions of AQIM at our attacks. So it's kind of interesting to even see in a foreign country Al-Qaeda is being downplayed and how they're collecting and how they're talking about a terrorist.
Wow. Do you think the government has rectified that segmenting people into this is ISIS, this is Al-Qaeda, this is Taliban?
Of course
not.
This
is Hamas. It's still compartmentalized.
100%. Man,
that's a real shame. Wow. Well, how are you tracking these guys coming up to the southern border?
Sure. So I think we should take a step back from the southern border, right? Because almost when they get to the border, it's too late.
Okay.
Because the border's wide open. So I think we should start where they're coming from or who's enabling them along the way, right? So the three key, I'd call exit points are India, Turkey, and Iran, right? So basically, all these people are going to those locations. So like the Africans, they're coming up through Africa using TikTok, which is crazy. So the Chinese and the Africans are actually using TikTok, and it's routing them to the southern border. So TikTok's like this human trafficking, smuggling application right now that people don't actually understand. But that's how they're making their movements, using TikTok. So anyway,
Can you elaborate on that a little bit? What do you mean they're making their movements through TikTok?
Yeah, so TikTok is telling them how to do the routing. So it's like, how do you get through this city? How do you get to this country? How do you cross this border? How do you get a visa to this country? Where do you catch a flight to get to South America? When you get to South America, what routes do you take? Where do you go to get aid or medical? Where like the friendly NGOs that'll assist you? Like all that type of stuff is inside and being used in TikTok, and they're using this as their routing feature.
Fast forward to the end of 2024. Think of your goals. What can you do right now to give yourself the best chance of succeeding? If you want to learn a new language, you absolutely should get Babbel. Babbel's quick 10-minute lessons are handcrafted by over 200 language experts to help you start speaking a new language in as little as 3 weeks. Babbel's designed by real people for real conversations. Now that my business is expanding, being fluent in multiple languages is more important than ever. Babbel's courses are convenient and work with my busy schedule. Here's a special limited time deal for our listeners. Right now, get up to 60% off your Babbel subscription, but only for our listeners at babbel.com/SRS. Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/SRS. Spelled BABBEL.com/SRS. Rules and restrictions may apply. Visit babbel.com for terms and details. You know, I've seen a lot during my time as a Navy SEAL and a CIA contractor, and I've learned even more hosting this show. The one thing I can tell you for sure is that it pays to be prepared. Right now, with our national debt surging to unfathomable levels, global tension rising, and the corruption in Washington, ask yourself, are you prepared financially? Me? I'm buying gold and silver so I'm not caught off guard by the next recession or global conflict. And I've teamed up with one of the top gold IRA companies, Goldco, to make that happen. So I want you to go to ShawnLikesGold.com or call 855-936-GOLD. You'll get a free 2024 wealth protection kit from Goldco, plus you may qualify for up to $10,000 in bonus silver while supplies last. So go to ShawnLikesGold.com or call 855-936-GOLD and get your bonus silver today. Once again, that's 855-936-GOLD or visit ShawnLikesGold.com. Performance may vary. Consult with your tax attorney or financial professional before making an investment decision. Wow.
Almost like we would use like ATAC.
Yeah. Wow. Do you think we should, this has been recently in the news. Do you think we should ban TikTok?
I think we should ban TikTok because it's a spy collection platform. So I would never put TikTok on my phone. But I think focusing on TikTok when we have way bigger issues, I have a problem with, right? Because honestly, that's not our biggest issue right now, right? Our biggest issue is like close the damn border, right? It's not that TikTok's bringing them through the border. It's you're letting them through the border.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So most terrorists are leaving from Turkey, India, and Iran. And the really interesting part is even in India, one of the planes basically through France. I don't know if you saw this in Paris. And Paris is like, who are all these random people on this plane? Like, why are they in our country? And the plane got like held on like the tarmac and everything because it was just a plane of illegals going to South America. So that's the one side of the problem. The other side of the problem is the countries in South America giving visas or just allowing these people in, right? So it's Brazil, Colombia, Ecuador, Panama. They're giving visas to all these people traveling in. And what a lot of people don't know is Ecuador allows Chinese citizens to come in without a visa. So all the Chinese, like the 6,000 increase % at the border, they came in to Ecuador and then came up because they don't even need to get a visa. Any Chinese person can go to Ecuador right now. So we need to stop these countries in Latin America from, first we got to stop that policy, right? Like they need a visa from China. And second, we got to tell these countries, hey, you're getting aid from the US, you're our southern neighbors. Like, why are you enabling this and allowing these people, which are coming to our border? So that's what we have to do while we're waiting for our own morons in our own government to close the border in some way. At least if we could stop the pipeline farther down, it would help in some way.
Yeah. Are you familiar with the Darien Gap at all?
Yeah, remember we chatted about it last time.
Yeah.
And I saw that you had, my friend Rick, that's a good friend of his that came on your show.
Really?
Yeah.
Michael Yan?
Yep.
Do you know anything about what's going on down there with the NGOs and the Chinese and...
Well, I mean, it's kind of like what I said, even when I said the tic-tac routing. So there's a lot of NGOs in place along these routes, right, to assist the migrants. But as you can imagine, their humanitarian assistance is also then giving these the illegals and even some of the bad guys going through, it's benefiting them, right? Because now they're safe routing. Now they can do it quicker, right? It's almost like they have a cover, right? Because they almost are associated now with an NGO, which changes the situation. Mm-hmm. So the NGOs inherently then are helping to increase or helping to improve this rat line into the United States. So they're actually almost like working against us, even though they're trying to do the right thing and just help people on the way. But it's becoming, as you can imagine, it makes it easier and it makes more people want to go through because they know there's these security blankets along the way.
Do you think these NGOs are doing this on purpose, or do you think this is incompetence?
I think it's a mix of things. I think a lot's incompetence. So, even if you just look at the evacuation from Kabul, right? They say, oh, it's the most successful. We took out 120,000 people. We took out 120,000 of the wrong people, right? There's 70,000 people. We don't know who they are. And they're there because there's these NGOs affiliated with State Department, right? And they wanted to save a bunch of humans. And they're like, come to the airport. You don't even need ID. Bring an electricity bill. So it's almost like this white savior complex. I know that sounds really bad. And they just almost care about numbers, right? Then, hey, are we bringing in the right people? Are we taking care of the right people? Are these people dangerous to bring into our community? They're not thinking through that, right? They just want to say, oh, yeah, we helped 500 people, donors, give us more money. And it's almost like this broken system. Yeah.
Wow. When it comes to, we're talking about Chinese, flying into Ecuador, coming up. Are you more concerned about the Chinese than you are the terrorist organizations coming into this country?
I'm concerned about them in separate ways. They're equal threats, right? Because the problem with China is these people are loyal to China, right? It's a different society than we live in, right? Like you and I can sit here and bash our government all day long, and we mean it, right? The Chinese don't really do that, and they don't all feel that way, right? So now there's all these people loyal to them in our country. So if something happens, they're at the ready and they will choose their government over our government. And people need to actually understand that, right? The terrorists, right, are their own thing, and the terrorists are their own threat. It's just a different way, right? They'll probably more take direction, from the terrorist group to do X, Y, and Z, to do something. But a lot of people don't realize if someone is willing to commit a crime to come into the country, they're involved in other crimes. And we always try to say this about our terrorists, right? They're involved in things like money laundering. Obviously, we know in drugs, a lot of child exploitation. We had another Benghazi attacker detained in October who actually we thought was dead because he was reportedly killed in a U.S. drone strike. He wasn't. The battle damage assessment by the U.S. military is horrible in Libya. Anyway, he was captured for basically raping a child. So a lot of people don't need to understand that terrorists are criminals and they are involved in a bunch of other crimes. And so, like I said, we need to view all this as criminal activity.
How are you getting the information of them coming up through the southern border?
Well, the one thing is a lot of them just show up in the border, as you can imagine. So we luckily have the counters. The problem is the U.S. government skewing those numbers, right? So when there's encounters at the border, they do kind of Latin American, other, like they don't have it listed by country. So you can't go and look and be like, oh, 1,000 Egyptians came, 2,000 Syrians came, etc. So we're obviously concerned with the terrorists leaving Afghanistan, because what has happened is, as we talked about last time, is, the Taliban is issuing these passports to terrorists, and they're doing two different things. So one is they're just sending fighters, trained fighters. They actually don't have, it's not like the old days, you trained in your little cell and your cell's gonna be deployed and you're gonna do attack. Al-Qaeda now is just training them and then forward deploying them. And then the interesting part is they are forward deploying senior Al-Qaeda members who will then guide them when they're ready. So Al-Qaeda has taken guys that have been in Al-Qaeda for 20 years, given them Afghan passports. So let's say they took an Egyptian as a good example. He has now an Afghan passport, and they're deploying them to the US, the Middle East, and Europe. And then now they're going to be kind of like the command central for then the terrorists who've all been trained, and then they'll tell them what to do. So I think that's like a really interesting thing. Like, we have a change in the terrorist tactics. You're not going to see the cell doing things as you always saw in the past. So I think people need to understand that. And then the other thing is,
before we move on, what are they training on? Is this, I mean, when we would see their training camps before, when the wars were both kicking, it was physical endurance, it was urban kind of warfare, it was shooting. What kind of stuff are they training on now? Do you have any insight into that?
Sure. If we just focus on the Al-Qaeda camps. So in Afghanistan right now, there's 30 Al-Qaeda training camps. 7 of them are suicide bomber only. So 7 of them, you're only in it to be a suicide bomber. The rest of them, it's just your standard. Like I said, there's an urban warfare camp, which I think is for a specific threat. But there's just your usual weapons. There's actually driving training. It's what you'd expect. There is not the IED making, that type of stuff. There's not like a new training piece, if that makes sense. But
same old tactics that we've seen in the war that are coming, but now everybody in America is going to see these tactics carried out at some point.
Yeah, correct. Because remember, back when we had a war with Afghanistan, it was like that country had the weakest passport in the world, right? Now everyone's trying to save Afghans. So all these foreigners now have Afghan passports, and nobody knows they're Afghan. And as we've learned, everyone drops their IDs at the border anyway. You don't know if someone's Iraqi, Syrian, Afghan. I mean, there is like no vetting of these people, right? We don't even know who these people are. And we're not going to be able to vet them anyway, as you can imagine. So if you have 30 new Al-Qaeda training camps, these are all new recruits. Like, people don't understand this, right? This is Mohammed, never been a terrorist in his whole life. His fingerprints aren't in any system. His photo's not in a system. He's not on a U.S. watch list. He's not marked as a terrorist. Even when we have terrorists on watch lists, I think a lot of people don't understand. A terrorist on a watch list does not mean we can get them at a border. So like a really good example is, we talked about Mullah Berader in the past, who I caught. So he spent many years in Pakistan. So in Pakistan, he lived there with a Pakistani passport under a Pakistani identity. So his name is Mohammed Arif, okay? Now, if you look at his Pakistani passport, and he would take that to the southern border, no one would ever know he's Mullah Berader, right? Because the U.S. government had an estimated date for him, so you don't have a date of birth. And then his passport in Pakistan only has a year of birth. I think it was like 1963. That's not useful. The name on the passport's different, so the name you have on watch listed isn't going to matter. The father's name on the passport's different. The nationality on the passport's different, right? So there is no way, if he came to the border as one of the most top 21 terrorists in the world at the time, he would have come in right just fine, and no one would have known they let a terrorist in.
Wow. Man, are you aware of any camps within the U.S., any of these sleeper cells?
I'm not aware of any camps. At least what I know is they're pre-training. At least Al-Qaeda's pre-training. One of the guys we're following is actually doing the passports. Do you want me to get into that
Let's
right
do
now?
it.
Okay.
Let's do it.
So obviously last time I was on the show, I told you we just found out one of our top 10 attackers at the Benghazi attacks was in Afghanistan. His name is Hamza al-Darnawi. So we started following him in September. And while following him, we found actually the number one target of our investigation. So we've never made the number one target of our investigation public. So this will be the first time anyone actually hears about him. So when we went to investigate the Benghazi attacks, we had two goals, right? Bring the attackers to justice and stop them from killing anyone else. So he's the number one target for stopping them from killing anyone else. So this individual, his name is Abdul Azim Ali Musa Ben Ali, long name. And then if you're Libyan, he's from the Al-Darsi family. He doesn't use the Al-Darsi as part of his name, but legally it could be. So we just call him Musa for short, me and Boone. So back in the day, he fought like everyone with Al-Qaeda in the Mujahideen era. And then he became a clandestine officer in Al-Qaeda. So what we did in our investigation, we're like, hey, he thinks he's kind of like this undercover CIA guy in Al-Qaeda. Let's follow him that way. So we've never shared publicly that we're following him. The really interesting part is he's had one job forever in Al-Qaeda, and it is to make the fake travel documents for Al-Qaeda's external operatives. So he started all the way back in Afghanistan back in the day. He made the documents for our Benghazi attackers. So we've talked. So what a lot of people don't get is when our Benghazi attacks happen, then a huge chunk of the terrorists went to the airport and got on airplanes. They thought the U.S. military was going to come in and rain hell on Benghazi. They left. So that all their passports were made in advance. A lot of people don't understand this. And actually, one of the people with the fake passports, he was an Al-Qaeda and Iraq guy, got captured in Turkey. And the crazy part is the U.S. didn't ask to extradite him. He got sent to Tunisia, and then he got released, and then our government said, oh, we're following him. They didn't. He killed a couple political leaders in Tunisia, and then he went to Syria, and luckily we ended up getting both him and his brother in strikes in Syria later on, but they were terrorists for many years after Benghazi. Then the crazy part is Musa then went on, and I don't know if you ever remember the name, the Khorasan Group.
Mm-mm.
So basically, kind of around the time of the Benghazi attacks, Al-Qaeda was like, hey, we need to focus all of our external operations into one place, right? Like we need basically a group in Al-Qaeda that only does external operations, so focus on Europe and the US mostly. So it became this Khorasan group. And it was led by a guy named Muslim Fadl. And it became the U.S.'s top priority, as you can imagine, right? It's like, hey, they're going to be the ones doing the attacks. Let's start striking them. And so the U.S. started striking them and basically wiped out the Khorasan groups. Musa was the Khorasan group's sole travel facilitator for Turkey. And most of their travel documents were Turkish because, as you can imagine, Turkey is a really easy travel document to get because of fraud and everything, and it gets you into Europe, right? So he was that group's only trusted facilitator. That's how important he is. Then, during this whole time, he's doing AQIM, so Al-Qaeda's North Africa branch, obviously. That's who did our attacks. Then he goes on and starts doing the travel documents for the Al-Badr Brigade. A lot of people don't know what the Al-Badr Brigade is, but if I tell you like what they did, you'll know. So do you remember the Ariana Grande concert? Mm-hmm. They did that. Remember the multiple attacks in France when they hit the Bataclan? That was also Al-Badr Mujahideen guys.
Okay.
So they were basically the Libyan terrorists, and a lot of them came from our attacks, that went to Syria. And at the time in Syria, you could join two terrorist groups. You could join the Al-Nusra Front, and their leader was just killed yesterday, the original leader actually, or you can join ISIS, right? So a lot of the ones from Libya steer toward ISIS, but Libyans have this weird thing where they make their own groups. And so the ones who steered toward ISIS instead of al-Nusra started calling themselves the Al-Badr Brigade. So that's where they came from. So anyway, so we have Musa till that point, okay? And then we lose him in our investigation. So we have him basically, he's in Libya, he's in Syria, he's in Turkey, and he spent some time in France during this, as you can imagine, because there was French attacks. He spent time in Nice. So we lose him completely. So we're thinking he's living just under an assumed identity, since he can make any of them, in Turkey or Syria. So lo and behold, we're following Hamza al-Darnawi, and he goes and sees Musa in Afghanistan. So we find out Musa's been hiding all these years and been protected by the Iranian government in Iran. So he's been in Iran. So of course, then we're like, well, what's Musa doing in Afghanistan? He has to be doing travel documents. So lo and behold, Musa works for Sirajuddin Haqqani in the Taliban's Ministry of Interior, and his sole job is he makes all the fake travel documents for al-Qaeda's external operatives who are leaving from Afghanistan. So he was involved in Benghazi. He's been ignored since Benghazi, and now he is the one man that knows every terrorist al-Qaeda is deploying from Afghanistan.
Whoa. And we have no interest in him.
None. And did I not say Sirajuddin Haqqani is his boss, and we're giving Sirajuddin Haqqani money weekly?
Yeah, we're gonna get into that shortly. But
yeah.
I can't. How is this guy not on anybody's radar?
I don't know.
Well, let's get back to the sleeper cells real quick within the U.S. Why do you think we haven't seen anything happen yet? This has been open for years and years. Even before this administration, the border was pretty wide open.
The border was open, but not at the point where 7 million were coming in. And also remember, it wasn't easy for these people to travel from like the Afghanistan border region to here. Now these pipelines are open. Like I told you, there's these illegal flights from India. Those weren't flying, right? There's these routes from, Iran and Turkey and Brazil. Those didn't really exist. Like this is all kind of like a new phenomenon. And so a lot of people don't realize like it's changed. The situation's changed, right? And I don't even think the terrorists put a huge focus on targeting the southern border. You got to remember, a lot of terrorists get in here legally, right? The 9/11 attackers got in here legally. We brought in a lot of terrorists during the Kabul evac illegally. Even, I talk about Mullah Berader, who I captured. So his wife's sister lives in Virginia, and in the last couple of years, the U.S. has let Mullah Berader's wife come to Virginia and see her sister. So the U.S. government has no problem issuing real visas to terrorists, and terrorists know this, right? Especially, Muslim Brotherhood's very involved in this type of stuff. So the southern border wasn't always the biggest focus because we have huge loopholes. I mean, the biggest loophole was obviously student visas. That's what the 9/11 attackers did. We obviously now have a humanitarian loophole, right? We have all these people we're trying to save that, may have been our allies in Afghanistan. So you just have to remember, terrorists take advantage of what is available at the time. Right now, the southern border is the easiest to take advantage of.
Is there any estimation on how many are in the U.S. right now?
No, but it's got to be thousands.
Yeah, it's got to be. I don't even know how you would estimate, but why do you think they haven't hit?
Well, you have to remember, unless you're like a lone wolf and just doing an attack on your own, you have to wait till you have the guidance or you're told what to do. Part of it is al-Qaeda has a new structure, at least al-Qaeda we're talking about, So they have to wait till these new commanders are in place in these locations. And then I can get into this now, but al-Qaeda has a whole plan in place. And while getting revenge for bin Laden's on that plan, it's not the number one on the plan. So the two number one pieces on the al-Qaeda plan right now that takes up almost all their bandwidth is number one is deploying the new trainees to Iraq and Syria to attack U.S. and Israeli forces. So people keep thinking ISIS is jumping up again in Syria. That's al-Qaeda. So just to let people know how this happened, I told you how Hamas trained in Afghanistan, right? So then after the Hamas attacks, of all people, Mullah Berater, this is why you don't negotiate with the guy who operationally runs all the terrorist attacks of a terrorist group, which was his job in Taliban. So Mullah Berater, and then he took an al-Qaeda delegation with him, which had the head of al-Qaeda external operations. Al-Qaeda has not named that person yet. So right now, it's the de facto head of it is Saif al-Adil. So the two of them go to Iran, and they meet with the Iranians and they say, hey, al-Qaeda and the Taliban want to support the Hamas effort, against the U.S. and Israel. What do you need from us? And Iran said, we just need you to send fighters to Syria and Iraq. So the interesting part is a lot of people need to understand this nuance. So the main operational head of al-Qaeda and the main operational head of Taliban wanted to help Hamas. And where did they go to get the permission to help Hamas? Iran. So anyone saying Iran didn't know about the Hamas attacks and they're not involved, and it's BS. Why would the two operational heads of both these groups go get the permission of Iran? So anyway, so a lot of the people they're training in these 30 camps in Afghanistan are going there. So they've already deployed 10,000 to meet this request from Iran, okay? So that's a huge chunk.
Wow.
The other biggest thing they're working on is the Fatah war plan. I don't know if you've heard about this.
I haven't.
Okay, so this is Al-Qaeda, Taliban, Al-Qaeda Indo subcontinent, the India Al-Qaeda, and then basically a political group in Pakistan called JUIF. It's run by a guy named Fazl Rahman, okay? So all these entities have come together and they made a war plan. And the war plan basically is to take over what's kind of called Pashtunistan. So you're going to take over the federally administrated tribal areas of Pakistan. You're going to take over Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, so the old Khyber province, and then they want to take over Baluchistan province. So this is Al-Qaeda's biggest personal plan, and so their war plan and their Fatah war planning is like I said, number 2 after the Syria-Iraq deployments. So they have, like I said, other ambitions, right? The Bin Laden thing, even the Africa stuff. They've basically been like, they made a plan for it, and we can discuss it later. But they're like, here's your plan, Africa. You run with it and do it, because we are laser focused on this war plan, and that's like what they're going to do in the meantime. And the thing is, they have to do it now. So the way like Haibatullah Akhundzada, who runs the Taliban, looks at it is, hey, we have all these terrorists here. Something's going to happen. Our terrorists are going to do stuff other places. And they have been, right? And people are going to start coming here. The only people we don't want coming here or being involved again is the Americans. The only way to stop the Americans is to affect Pakistan, because Pakistan's the only regional government who's going to bring Americans back into the fold, right? So Haibatullah is basically, it's us or them, right? So what he first wants to do is create a buffer. They all do, everyone in the plan. They want to create a buffer between Afghanistan and Pakistan. But then they want to make Pakistan in another phase, they're not at that phase yet, like a part of the Islamic Emirate, right? And then in a much later phase, you get the Kashmir piece. So yeah, so right now it's just, let's take this territory, and then we replan and do a different war plan.
Oh, man. What do you think it'll look like when they start attacking within the U.S. and Europe? Is it going to look like what we just saw happen in Russia? Would they kill like 100 and was it 140?
Yeah, 140
something?
almost. So yeah, they're always going to do that type, right? Because that's the soft target. That's where terrorism comes from, right? You're like terrorizing the people. You're making the government look bad. I don't think that's going to stop. But I think they care a little more about establishing, spreading Sharia in Islamic State. And you don't get a lot of benefit if you carry out like 10 attacks in America, because then America's like, okay, we're going to get back involved in Afghanistan, right? They want to build this safe haven. They want to grow this safe haven. They want to train their new fighters. They want to expand, hopefully, into Pakistan, and people let them. So we have to look at it in the way Al-Qaeda looks at it. They're very patient. They have a long plan, right? We're a piece of the long plan, but they don't get a lot of benefit from doing X, Y, and Z. It's not saying they won't do an attack. It's just they have things that are so much more important to them. And remember, they're still getting a win. They're attacking Americans in Iraq. And their goal for the Iraq piece is they want to, even though the U.S. is saying it anyway, they want to push Americans out of Iraq. So when Al-Qaeda, which they'll say they did it, pushes Americans out of Iraq, that's another huge win. And that's the same thing that happened in Afghanistan. So one big piece of their global strategy is push Americans out. Like I told you, one is just attack the embassies. But it's like, we want you to replicate all of you Al-Qaeda allies or whomever, replicate the success we had in Afghanistan elsewhere, right? So like in Libya, in eastern Libya, there's a head of Al-Qaeda. His name is Ashraf Sultan. He was one of our Gitmo detainees, and he was, of course, a 2012 Benghazi attacker. That's why I know this. So the Haqqanis reached out to him and had a whole discussion, and it basically was the Haqqanis saying, hey, we want to repeat the success of Afghanistan in Tripoli. And so that's like another piece of their plan, right? They want everywhere else to kind of become little Talibanistans, as I call it, right? And then basically have this huge Islamic emirate. Like, it's a really, really big goal. And it kind of is Osama bin Laden's old goals, right? And now just the next generation is trying to do them. So you have to view it that way. It's not all this short satisfaction thing for them. Okay.
How do you think they're going to spread Sharia law and their agenda? Are they going to embed in our government? I mean, it sounds like, we're funding them, so they got to be in there somewhere already.
Yeah, they've been embedding in our government, especially Taliban sympathizers. I mean, gosh, like, we need to fire a lot of people in the State Department. Unfortunately, Al-Qaeda has been very, very patient. They haven't just embedded in our government. There are Al-Qaeda representatives in a lot of embassies around the world, in a lot of like Ministry of Foreign Affairs around the world. They have slowly seeped in as we focus on, hey, I want to see the Al-Qaeda guy with a gun. I don't care about the Al-Qaeda guy working the consular section of the Paris embassy, right? You don't focus on that because it's not the shiny object. Well, that guy now, right, is an ambassador.
Wow.
And so Al-Qaeda's been so smart about that.
Man, what do you think Americans need to watch out for?
Themselves.
Yeah.
I mean, we're causing this own failure ourselves, right? Like, we could have beat the Taliban in Afghanistan, but our government refused to designate them a terrorist group, right? They tied the hands of the war fighters. And you know what a lot of people don't understand is they blame everything on Pakistan when a lot of it's us and Pakistan, right? We did the whole Mujahideen together. But when I was in Pakistan, we captured so many senior Taliban members. Like, most of them are never going to be made public, right? So the U.S. government says, hey, capture this bad guy. We capture the guy, we ask him some questions, we write some pretty reports, but then the U.S. has no follow-on. The U.S. doesn't say, let's move him to Bagram. We're going to do criminal charges against him. Let's put him through a court of law. So they end up in basically a prison in Pakistan. And then after 5 years, the prison's overpopulated because there's so many of these Taliban guys in it. And there's diseases going through. And the Taliban hey, are you ever going to charge this? The Pakistanis you going to charge this guy? We don't have charges against him in our country. U.S. does nothing. So you have to remember the U.S. is the reason they don't have end games for any of these people. Guantanamo Bay showed that, right? Picked a bunch of guys and then there's no plan of what to do with them. Well, the same thing's happening when we arrest terrorists in these countries. So they're being detained 5 years maybe, and then they're back out. And then you're just chasing them again. And also in prison, they were in prison with all the terrorists and they made better networks. So we are causing all of our own problems besides obviously funding them and everything. But we're really not bringing terrorists to justice.
Yeah, that's painfully obvious.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's move into, I know we're going to talk about Libya.
Sure.
In the mortar team.
My favorite subject.
Let's do it.
Yep. Took us 4,000 days, but we found the mortar team. So, as you know. So the really interesting part is, you know how you make assumptions and then you go down rabbit holes and you spend a lot of time, right? So we knew who planned the mortar attack, right? His name was Wissam bin Hamid. He's deceased now, and we talked about him last time.
This is the mortar attack in Benghazi.
Yeah, so this was the
listening.
one in the CIA annex on September 12th. So, that night there were 6 terrorist attacks. So this is the last one that killed Ronan Bub, or as, the SEAL team calls him, Ty. So this is the team then who shot the mortars. So they were obviously, as you can imagine, we were CIA. So the mortar team has always been like the holy grail of our investigation, right? Like, we have to get the mortar team. So the interesting part is we spent all this time thinking they were under this Wissam bin Hamid, and he ran a group called Libya Shield. So we spent tons of time looking for the mortar team inside Libya Shield, right? Because we're like, he had to have used his own group members. Of course not. He called the best mortar team in town that night and said, hey, I need you to do a mortar strike in the CIA. And they said, sure. So that's why it took us so long to identify the mortar team, because we were looking in the completely wrong group. So the mortar team ended up being, it was called the Hassan al-Jabr cell. And really that name it was actually, the crazy part is everything always ties together. There was an Al Jazeera journalist, and he basically got ambushed and killed. And so the cell named themselves after it. But the interesting part is the ambush and kill was to kill this basically senior commander, Abdel Fattah Yunus. And he was kind of the other General Haftar. There was like 2 General Haftars. So this journalist was going to interview him. So the terrorists were like, good, we'll kill him with the journalist. Well, the journalist hadn't got to him yet. And so they ambushed a journalist, and unfortunately killed a journalist and some of his team. I'm friends with one of the security detail on the team. There's a video of this. It's on like YouTube, the ambush and everything.
No kidding.
Because they're filming, because they're going to go do an interview. So anyway, they kill him. So it's just really interesting, because when this general ends up dying, the people involved are Ahmed Abu Khatala, who the U.S. framed as a mastermind, the brother of Wissam bin Hamid, Mohammed bin Hamid, right? So it was our terrorists who then ended up going and killing this general. So it likely was our terrorists in some fashion who unfortunately also killed this Al Jazeera reporter. So anyway, the cell's named after them, and they're inside of another group called the Rafala al-Sahati Brigades. And then the Rafala al-Sahati Brigades was a cell within 17 February Martyrs Brigade. So for the people who know the Benghazi story, most people understand the 17 February Martyrs Brigade was like the security, like outside given by the government of Libya to protect the consulate. And then there was a private company called the Blue Mountain Group who were the next step in, and they were like the local guards on the compound. And remember when I talked about the terrorist that was detained for like the child rape a few months ago? He was Blue Mountain Group. And I think that's one of the reasons why we can't get it in the U.S. press, because the U.S. government has always said Blue Mountain Group didn't have any terrorists, no Blue Mountain Group members attacked us, and he was a member of Blue Mountain Group. Remember, that was a State Department paid contract to Blue Mountain. So basically, State Department paid for that attacker. And they don't want to be honest about it. So anyway, this is how incestuous it is. So this Rafala al-Sahati, they were the mortar team, and then they also had attackers at the consulate. So this group was involved in both. But it makes perfect sense. So the U.S. had really bad collection of terrorism at the time. But it makes sense because the person who ran the group, his name is Mohammed al-Gharabi. He goes back and forth between Libya and Turkey a lot. He's top 10 of our investigation. He was the al-Qaeda commander for Benghazi at the time. He had fought with al-Qaeda in the Mujahideen, Afghanistan. The U.S. did not know that was his job. They only knew him as the commander of Rafala al-Sahati, if that makes sense, which they thought, it's like an Islamist militia. So if you actually learn who these people are and what their roles are, it's just all Al-Qaeda, right? And Al-Qaeda asked Al-Qaeda guys to do everything. But because the U.S. didn't do the investigation right, like a lot of people still don't understand all these inner workings.
Did you share the mortar team with the FBI?
Yes.
How did that go?
So it didn't go anywhere. So obviously I'm a targeter, right? So we didn't just find the mortar team. We found the information you would need to target the mortar team. Obviously, I won't say the pieces of that information so the mortar team doesn't do something about it. So we shared that information the first week of November with the FBI and the State Department's Rewards for Justice program. We still have not had a response from the FBI. But the interesting part is the Justice Department of the United States is going to retry their fake mastermind, Ahmed Abu Khatallah, this summer, which is insane. So the first time he went through the trial, he got like 22 years, which is amazing for a guy who wasn't the mastermind, showed up late, hung out outside until Al-Qaeda left, and then went in and grabbed some useless items. Because remember, there's nothing classified in the consulate. He got 22 years. They're going to retry him for more time this summer. So anyway, they have contacted people from the CIA annex to testify against him this summer. So they have not responded to us on actually trying to go after the mortar team, but they want to have another dog and pony show with their fake mastermind and get the CIA annex people to come in and play this little game, which we're all pretty, frankly, pissed off about. The other thing is just to kind of like jump ahead, you actually saw the letter we wrote as a team.
I did.
So it was me, a case officer, our commo officer, and then the entire GRS team put out a group letter because when we identified the mortar team, 5 members of the mortar team, so the mortar team's only 10 people, so half of the mortar team were family members of FBI's key witness in their first fake mastermind trial against Ahmed Abu Khatallah. So they took this Libya and they paid him millions of dollars. They moved him here. He testified that Abu Khatallah was the mastermind of this attack, which we've proven he's not. It's Muqtada al-Mukhtar, a famous AQIM commander. And basically, during this whole process, he has other family members at the consulate attacks, which we knew. But he basically covered up that 5 members of the mortar team were his family. And this is FBI's witness against Khatallah.
How's this happening?
I don't know. So maybe that's why they haven't responded to us. But yeah, he lives in America. He lives in Virginia, people. And the worst part is, it's not even the worst part. That is the worst part. But, so I'm an intelligence officer. We all were in Benghazi. So this witness in 2011 kidnapped a Libyan intelligence officer, tortured and killed him. And he's actually wanted for that crime in Benghazi. It's a war crime, obviously. And the U.S. basically bringing him here to be involved in Khatallah's fake trial is stopping justice from that family. The intelligence officer's name was Nasser al-Sarmani. And there's actually trials going on right now for his situation. So us having this witness here is stopping that family from getting justice for that murder. And Ahmed Abu Khatallah, the fake mastermind, as I told you, killed the general. He actually has a potential of the death penalty in Benghazi. So actually the FBI setting him up as a fake mastermind also kept him alive when he should be on death row, already have been given the death sentence in Libya for that crime. So we're actually also protecting terrorists as part of this Benghazi cover-up.
We're harboring them.
Yeah, so we don't have to be honest and say it was Al-Qaeda. So good luck with that trial this summer, guys.
Oh my gosh,
It's going to be a shit show.
This is so disturbing that we just continue to do this. Mm-hmm. I mean, where do you? I don't even know what to say.
I know. I do hope this man in Virginia knows, though. The entire CIA Annex team knows where you live. We know what you drive. And stay the hell away from us.
Are you worried at all bringing this information out?
I mean, that doesn't fall on me, right? FBI did a failed investigation. They brought a terrorist to America, right? Someone has to say what they did wrong because he's a threat, right? He doesn't even live that far from the CIA. He is a threat to Americans. And so someone actually has to do the right thing and say it, right? Like, he needs to be deported, like, immediately. And he needs to face trial anyway for a murder in Libya. Like, it's just what they have done with just the Benghazi investigation in general, as you can imagine. It's just it's just so criminal. It's so incompetent. It's so frustrating for us who have been there. And now we're watching our terrorists go on and do other things, right? Like I told you, making these passports for this next generation of Al-Qaeda guys. Like, that guy should not even be free to do it. The best Al-Qaeda passport guy in the world should have been detained after Benghazi.
Yeah. Yeah. It almost just doesn't even seem real.
I know.
You know, it's
and people need to know we've been this bad for this long, right? Benghazi was 2012.
Man. Well, Sarah, let's take a quick break.
Perfect.
And then we'll pick up right where we left off. When I first started this whole podcasting thing, an online store was about as far from my mind as you can get. And now, most of you already know this, but I'm selling Vigilance Elite gummy bears online. We actually have an entire merch collection that's coming soon. And let me tell you, it is so easy because I'm using a platform that is extremely user-friendly, and that's Shopify. Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. What I really like about Shopify is it prompts you all the things that you want to do with your web store, like connect your social media accounts, write blog posts, just have a blog in general. Shopify actually prompts you to do this. You want people to leave reviews under your items? You can do that on Shopify. It's very simple. Shopify helps you turn browsers into buyers with the internet's best converting checkout, 36% better on average compared to the other leading commerce platforms. Shopify is a global force for millions of entrepreneurs in over 175 countries and power 10% of all e-commerce platforms here in the United States. You can sign up right now for $1 a month. It's shopify.com/Shawn. That's all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/Shawn now to grow your business no matter what stage you're in. That's shopify.com/Shawn. The famous Abraham Lincoln quote says, "Good things come to those who wait, but only the things left by those who hustle." Well, if you're a business owner and want the best people on your team, the same applies. Thankfully, ZipRecruiter puts the hustle in your hiring, so you find qualified candidates fast. And now you can try it for free at ZipRecruiter.com/SRS. ZipRecruiter's unique technology finds top talent for your roles right away. Immediately after you post your job, ZipRecruiter's matching technology starts showing you qualified people so you can hire fast. Let ZipRecruiter give you the hiring hustle you need. See why 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day. Just go to ZipRecruiter.com/SRS to try it for free. Again, that's ZipRecruiter.com/SRS. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire. All right, Sarah, we're back from the break, and last time you were here, you had talked about one of the Benghazi attackers being captured. Have any more been captured since the last time we spoke?
Yeah, there's the 2 I brought up, Hashim Abu Sidra and Faraj Shaku. So they've both been captured, but the U.S. has, from what I know, haven't asked for access to them, haven't asked to deport them in any way. And the really interesting part is Hashim, at least, his role is he's very senior. Like, he's top 10 in the entire world in terrorism, and he runs the entire Sahel, at least he did. So everything through that whole portion of Africa, he was in charge of it. So if it was weapons, drugs, moving humans, he ran all that. So a lot of people don't really realize, like, Al-Qaeda and ISIS are kind of like billion-dollar organizations in Libya. They run more as like businesses instead of terrorist groups. And this matters because just a couple months ago, the Haqqani network sent a delegation from Afghanistan to Libya to get weapons. So the interesting part is, right, you ask a lot of questions. like, are they just going there to get weapons because Al-Qaeda in Libya is rich and they'll just give them for free? Because Al-Qaeda doesn't charge them, right? They put the weapons order together and gave it to them. Or are they going to Libya because the weapons are not U.S. origin, right? So a big problem right now that's happening in Pakistan is all these suicide attacks are happening, and the Pakistanis are being very forward-leaning and putting all the pictures out, and they're saying, hey, these terrorists have M4s, they have M16s, they have U.S. gear. I mean, some of the guns actually say property of the U.S. government, right? Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of flack then going, as you can imagine, on the Taliban. It's like, hey, we know these weapons came from you because of the type of weapons they are. So I think it's really interesting to see the Haqqanis going to Libya to get weapons. Now, are they getting those weapons to actually go back to Pakistan and Afghanistan? It's not entirely sure, because the Haqqanis, as I told you, have had this goal to push the success of what happened in Afghanistan out. And one of the groups they're doing that with is Boko Haram. So in June, so just last summer, the Haqqanis brought a Boko Haram delegation to Afghanistan, and they actually brought them over to the border into Pakistan, and they toured ISIS KP training camps. So we don't know exactly who the Haqqanis bought these weapons for, but the interesting thing is I do know some of the weapons that they purchased. So they purchased Russian PKT heavy machine guns, and then they purchased like 150 and 160 millimeter like artillery shells. So, you know, like that, the PKT is a huge gun, right? It's not like a one man like holds the gun. So they're purchasing also some like big supplies. And what a lot of people don't know is everyone still thinks it's Libya 2011 and 2012. And these are like stockpiled weapons from Gaddafi. Terrorists are not buying 15, 20-year-old weapons, right? They're going to Libya and buying brand new weapons. So it's like, where are the brand new weapons coming from? So there's like this whole weapons trade going into Libya. Libya is one of the best places in the world right now to buy weapons, and they're coming from Serbia, they're coming from Ukraine, and they're coming from Turkey. And so there's like this giant, almost like weapons depot right now.
They're coming from
Libya.
Ukraine too.
Yeah.
Huh?
So those are the major pipelines of weapons coming into Libya. So these are new weapons.
How are they getting in from Ukraine?
I don't know exactly what the Ukraine pipeline is. I just know that that's the origins of
So the stuff that we're sending over to Ukraine is some of it's winding up in Libya?
Yeah, I don't know if exactly the U.S. weapons, but weapons from Ukraine are definitely winding up in Libya. Do I know, are they exactly all the ones we provided? Could they be? Remember, both militaries are fighting in Ukraine, right? So Ukraine has weapons, Russia has weapons, right? So we have to remember there's both sides of the weapons spectrum in Ukraine, and there's corruptions on both sides, right? There's corruption on the Ukrainian side and corruption on the Russian side. So the weapons could be coming from either side.
Interesting. How is AQ kind of developing in Libya?
So the really interesting thing is nobody really knows Al-Qaeda in Libya exists right now, because Al-Qaeda in Libya has a deal with the Libyan government, and it is, we will not attack inside Libya. So they're running purely as a business in Libya, and then they're helping, obviously, Al-Qaeda in other places, like Al-Qaeda is trying to set up in Mali, so they're going to help that piece, right? They've been helping fund different parts of Al-Qaeda around the world. They've helped fund ISIS, so all those type of things. So they've basically done, so terrorists have gotten really smart. Like, they're all trying to follow this Taliban model. Like, hey, if we're a political organization, we won't be targeted, right? Or targeting will be limited. So Al-Qaeda and Libya have renamed themselves, and they're the Islamic Reform Movement, and they're trying to make it almost like we're a political group versus a terrorist group now. And it's actually all being done by Abdel Hakim Belhaj. So he's kind of one of the most famous Libyan terrorists. He's pretty much the only terrorist most people know, because everyone's like, why isn't he in your Benghazi investigation? Like, because he wasn't an attacker. But he is kind of Al-Qaeda's point man, and he's the one kind of doing this whole restructuring. He's the one, right, when the Haqqanis come, they're working with Belhaj. He used to be in the CIA black sites. Of all things, he runs an airline. I mean, it's just this crazy universe we live in now. Like, these terrorists are these like power brokers. And he is aligned with the government of Libya that the U.S. is aligned with. So we are on the same side as the Islamic Reform Movement in Libya, like the U.S. government. The U.S. government's on the wrong side in Libya, and we're basically aligned with him. And the U.S. government will downplay him. I don't even know if he's designated as a terrorist anymore. They will downplay him and say he is not Al-Qaeda when he is the head of Al-Qaeda right now in Libya.
Oh my gosh, man. I can't believe like how many people were just pushed into the wayside like nothing happened.
Well, the crazy part is, too, so remember how I told you we were following, like, Hamza al-Darnawi in Afghanistan? So obviously we found him, right? So we're like, we need to get a bounty on him so someone can do something about him, obviously a local, right? So we reach out to the FBI and they say, hey, there's no budget to put bounties on him, so we asked for $1 million bounty. Well, just last week, the State Department asked for $53 million to put a new embassy in Tripoli, an embassy in the city where 75% of the at-large Benghazi attackers are being harbored by the government of Libya. So there's plenty of money to put an embassy in, but there's not any money to go after the terrorists who are going to attack that embassy when you put it in. Isn't that not the craziest, like, thinking ever?
I just don't understand this stuff. Like, I don't, how can this even be happening? It's insane. It's insane. What do you think, what are AQ's plans for the rest of Africa?
Yeah, so Africa is kind of like third or fourth in their priorities right now. So it's not a focus, as you can imagine, because the war plan and the Iraq and Syria are taking so long. So what they decided to do is, hey, Africa, we're going to give you ownership of Africa, and you basically take our successes and move them forward. But the way we're going to do that is we're going to give you one of the best Al-Qaeda operational planners ever to exist, and we're going to relocate him from Afghanistan to Mali, and then he will head it all, and he's in charge, and he's basically the AQ head for Africa, and you go to him, right? So you don't need to go and check with like the Bin Ladens or Saif al-Adil. Like, you go to him, he's in charge of Africa, okay? So it's almost a little decentralized. So the interesting part is the person who they did this with, his name is Abu Muhammad al-Mazri. He's also known as Abdullah Ahmed Abdullah. Now I'm saying this, and every person who knows him is like, he's dead. So the Israelis think they assassinated him in Iran. They didn't. They killed the wrong guy. And so we can't get anyone to believe us that he's alive because, like, well, the Israelis did it. People need to realize the Israelis have assassinated the wrong people, right? The Lillehammer affair is the greatest example. This is when they went after, his name was Ali Hassan. He kind of ran like the 17th Force in the Black September for the Munich Olympic attacks from 1972. So they thought they assassinated him, up in Scandinavia, but they got the wrong guy. They got like a Moroccan waiter. Well, they also got the wrong guy in Iran. So Abu Muhammad is alive. Al-Qaeda has deployed him to Mali, and he's now, like I said, the head of Al-Qaeda in Africa, and he's also the father-in-law of Hamza bin Laden's second wife.
Whoa.
But it's even better. He's also was involved in the Kenya and Tanzania embassy bombings, and that's why we think U.S. Embassy Bamako is one of the embassies under the most threat right now.
Do you think I'm just curious, do you think they have any interest in all of the natural resources in Africa?
So the really interesting part is Al-Qaeda, yes. ISIS has been better at capitalizing on it, ISIS and Wagner Group, of taking the mines. But Al-Qaeda now realizes how profitable it is. So Al-Qaeda and Taliban took over 11 illegal mines in the northern parts of Afghanistan in the last couple of years, and they're making $25 million a month. So $25 million a month comes into the Taliban, 25% of it goes off the top to Al-Qaeda. So far, Al-Qaeda has made $200 million alone off of only 11 illegal mines. So yes, they now understand how profitable it is, and I do think that they're going to now take more advantage now that they've realized, wow, like this is major money. I mean, $25 million a month is like huge money.
Who is the most powerful terrorist organization right now?
I mean, I know I'm biased. I mean, I still think it's Al-Qaeda. I still think it's the Bin Ladens.
And they're pretty much intertwined with just about everybody now.
Yes.
Is there anybody that's pushing back on them? Or is there any terrorist rivalry or
To Al-Qaeda?
Yeah.
Zero.
Nothing. So it's becoming just one big organization.
Yeah, and what Al-Qaeda's been really smart. The only rival they would have is ISIS. So they've been really smart, and they've been like, remember I told you they can move weapons and they don't really pay for it? They've given ISIS weapons, for free. In Afghanistan, actually like 20% of the ISIS KP budget actually comes from Al-Qaeda. So Al-Qaeda's been very, very smart to actually almost like pay ISIS off to leave them alone. But also there has been crossover between the two groups too, as you can imagine, especially like I told you, Libya is a great example. So yeah, I don't see anyone right now going after Al-Qaeda.
Man. How does the terrorism in Libya tie into Palestinian terrorism?
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's such a historical thing, like people don't understand. So it goes back actually to 1911. In Libya, there was a hero, Omar al-Mukhtar, okay? He ran the first Libyan revolution, and that at the time was against the Italians. So he was fighting this revolution, and a gentleman named Izzeddin al-Qasim, he was born in the Ottoman Empire. He was basically born in Syria. He ended up settling in what became the British mandated Palestine. He came and fought with Omar Mukhtar. If that name sounds familiar, that's where the Al-Qasim Brigades is named after. That obviously just did the Hamas attacks, right? So the Libya relationship goes back very strong to Palestinian terrorism to 1911. Then we've already kind of discussed Munich, but Gaddafi, when he was in power, he funded part of the Olympic Village attack in 1972 in Munich against the Israeli athletes. Even beyond that, he buried the dead terrorists from Black September in Tripoli. So they're in Tripoli right now. Then, so when the Hamas attacks were happening, there was a lot of press coming out about the air campaign, right? And there was a name associated with it. It was Zawahiri. That is actually a Libyan Tunisian. A lot of people think he's only Tunisian because his actually like real name isn't public. So it's only his kunya that everybody knows. So he is the person who created the drone program for Hamas. And he's also close to a lot of our Benghazi attackers, to include Wissam bin Hamid. And they basically ran a group in Libya called the Hamas Cell. And what the Hamas Cell did, it basically was just an organization that moved weapons and whatnot, aid to Hamas over the years, to Gaza. Wissam bin Hamid was involved, and the fake mastermind, Ahmed al-Qattal, is involved. We even put a picture of Ahmed al-Qattal in Gaza in the book. So one of his pictures is actually him inside Gaza around 2011. When Wissam bin Hamid, he's our mastermind of the mortar attack. When he was killed, Abu Ubaidah, who's really famous now, the spokesperson for Hamas, basically put out a post on his now defunct Twitter, and he said, hey, we want everyone to know this hero was like the number one supplier of weapons to the Al-Qasim Brigade. So our Benghazi attacker, who did the CIA attack that no one went after, was Hamas's number one weapons supplier. Now, one more piece of the weapons supply. The last piece is basically a gentleman named Khalid Sharif, another terrorist that was in the black sites. So after the Libyan Revolution, the new one, the 2011 one, he made this organization called the Libyan National Guard. The U.S. government got in a relationship with him, and basically what he was using it as was a cover and a front to buy new weapons for Hamas. And he was doing it at the time with the Hamas. Hamas had a representative sent from Gaza to Libya, and his name was Marwan Ashkar. And so Khalid Sharif and Marwan used to buy new weapons as the National Guard. Even Marwan had a National Guard ID card, like he's a Libyan, so he could carry weapons in Libya. And then they would obviously send those weapons to Gaza. The Libyan government did go after Marwan just because it was such a big criminal enterprise, as you can imagine. He got detained in 2016. But since the attacks in Gaza in October, and like I said, so many Libyans are very pro the Palestinian cause, the prime minister, who is the one I told you that released a lot of our terrorists, but the terrorists in the summer, Dabaiba, he released the Hamas cell in December, just this past December. And it was all over the press because he released them, and they got on a private plane from Tripoli to Qatar. It's so interconnected, Hamas. And the funny thing is when we put our book out, we actually went back and forth. How much Hamas do we put in? Because it's going to throw people off because they don't understand the connectivity. They keep Al-Qaeda and Hamas separate. And so we only just touched on it. And then in retrospect, we're like, we should have explained this more to people, right? Because now they don't understand. So when I say Al-Qaeda's training Hamas in Afghanistan, people think it sounds crazy. It's like, no, this relationship is going on a really long time, right? It's just you didn't collect it that way, so you don't know it exists.
Man. It's crazy how this all ties in.
But I know. It's what I always try to tell people is like, so you know how we look at things like an org structure, and that's how the U.S. government looks at stuff, right? Like Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and like China of all things, everything has this kind of like wrapped around interconnectedness, and that's actually how terrorism is, but we're viewing it from almost like a Western focus, and we don't know how to view it another way, but we need to start.
Yeah, that's a good point. How involved do you think all these terrorist organizations are with China? Are they friendly with them? Sure.
So, I mean, I can talk about like China, Afghanistan is the best piece, if that makes sense.
Well, we'll get into that.
Sure.
Because that's Afghanistan specific.
I know,
which because
the thing is, China has one major terrorist group. They're focused on, well, they're not terrorists, the Uyghurs, right? And so China uses relationships with other terrorists to collect on the terrorists they're going after, if that makes sense. So China has collaborative relationships that you could almost call counterterrorism relationships with terrorist groups to collect on the people they want to collect on. So they do it for advantageous purposes.
Do you think there's any like collaboration going on in Latin America with them, or is it all kind of Afghanistan?
I'm not entirely sure. Like, I don't know the answer to that question. Now, China's very smart. If there was a benefit they got from working with a terrorist group that has a foothold in a place in Latin America where they're trying to build a port or establish something, I think they'd make the relationships, right? Terrorist, narco, whomever is going to get them to their goal.
Okay. Makes sense. I appreciate that. So let's transition to Afghanistan. I think we all saw the State of the Union when Steve Naku, am I saying his name correctly? Nakui.
Yeah, I'm not good. Yeah, it's Kareem's father.
Yeah, his son died at Abbey Gate in Afghanistan and unfortunately was escorted out for yelling United States Marine Corps.
Yeah.
And arrested.
And handcuffed, which is ridiculous. We're all super offended by this, by the way.
Yeah. And anyways, I know you want to go on about some of the mastermind behind Abbey Gate.
Yeah, I mean, well, last time I was here, we talked about the actual suicide bomber and that he got released from Bagram, which we still have held no one accountable for that, which blows my mind. But, you know, as someone who's obviously gone after the terrorists at an attack, right, focus on the masterminds like we did for Benghazi, you know, I do want to explain a little bit about the Abbey Gate suicide bomber because I feel like I need to explain some so the families understand, like, hey, maybe U.S. isn't the solution to getting him, right? Like, maybe we have to go another way. I mean, I learned this in Benghazi, right? Like, how Benghazi worked is the mastermind of the consulate attack taken up by the French. On my birthday, by the way. Thank you, France. The mastermind of the Annex attack taken out by the Libyan National Army and the Emirati Air Force, right? The other top two leaders of AQRM involved in the attack taken up by the French, right? So we need to move beyond the fact that the U.S. is the only one who's going to go after these guys because they're not. So the really interesting piece with the mastermind attack is named Sanaullah Ghaffari, okay? So he's the head of ISKP in, the Pakistan-Afghanistan border region. What a lot of people don't know is around like 2018, early 2019 timeframe, he was running the Haqqani network cell in Kabul. So he had 1,000 Haqqani network members under him and was basically really close to Sirajuddin Haqqani. And Sirajuddin said, hey, we're putting this Doha deal into place. And when this Doha deal goes into place, as the Haqqani network, I will no longer be able to do suicide attacks and suicide bombings because it's part of the deal that we're not going to do them anymore. I need a way to still commit the attacks I need to commit. Sanullah, will you join ISIS? And if you join ISIS, I will let you have our networks. I will let you have the resources you need for attacks. And so Sanullah agreed, and Sanullah basically became a plant in ISIS. And he actually, because of his network in Kabul, basically became quickly the head of ISIS, ISKP for Kabul, okay? So come around like March 2020, ISKP is having their Shura meeting. So all their senior leaders who run the different committees and the head, and it's down in Kandahar. It gets raided. So it's raided by like a commando, Sami Sadat, okay? So they go in and they arrest everyone. They arrest like 38 people and they detain them all. So all the senior leadership now of ISKP is basically in prison. And the funny part is they also arrested 4 Russian women with him, which is actually like super funny because I'm going to just tell a little story. I don't really tell stories, but I was on an airplane once to Quetta and there was hardly anyone on the plane. So the flight attendant got really chatty with me. And then she goes, "Are you Russian?" And I said, "No, why would you ever think I'm Russian?" She said, "The only white people who come to Quetta are Russian prostitutes." And I was like, "What? You think I'm a prostitute?" So the funny part is when I heard there's 4 Russian women in this raid, I'm like, oh my God, that's where the Russian prostitutes go. They hang on the wings of the Shura meeting for the terrorists. So anyway, which is another thing, right? These terrorists want to stone women for adultery and they're bringing in Russian prostitutes, and I'm tired of the crap. So anyway, so that now is Aslam Faruqi, okay? So Aslam Faruqi was the head of ISIS-KP. He started the group. He was a Pakistani, and he came from a group called the Taliban Pakistan, okay? So he's now in prison. So ISKP is like, who's going to lead us? And they're like, well, the Sanullah kind of has the most guys under him in Kabul, and they started just deferring to him, and he became the leader of ISKP. Well, so now we have the leader of ISKP is a Haqqani plant. Does this not blow your mind? So the Abbey Gate attack happens, right? When the Abbey Gate attack happened, Haqqani network had taken over the external perimeter security outside. So all those security checkpoints were the Haqqani network. So this suicide bomber went through Haqqani network checkpoints. The one thing he was promised, Sanullah, if you go embed yourself in ISIS-K and you need to do attacks, you get the green light. You can use all of our networks. So anyone who acts like this was just an ISKP attack when it was led by a Haqqani plant in ISKP, right? It's a huge disconnect. But then I want like the parents to understand this, right? The U.S. is aligned now basically with this Haqqani network. Sirajuddin Haqqani has very strong feelings for Sanullah. Sanullah has kind of gone off and done a lot of his own since, right? Like I don't think Siraj Haqqani is telling him everything to do, but the relationship's close enough to where Sirajuddin Haqqani is not going to kill Sanullah Ghaffari, right?
Yeah.
So I really hope like the families like really like just understand this issue. The other piece is that so ISKP has a headquarters in Kona, right? And there's an individual who actually stays at that headquarters. And so, you have a mastermind for attack, but you have to have a guy who puts all the pieces together to make an attack happen. So for Abbey Gate, that guy is Abdullah Omar Bajawari. And right now he's the head of intel for ISKP. So that's another target, right? That they should be going after for Abbey Gate because he's kind of the plotter and planner, and we don't even hear his name brought up, right? So if we're talking about justice for Abbey Gate, like, and no one's even talking about, right, the key people we need to be taking out, I don't even know if there's active efforts to go after these people.
It doesn't sound like there are.
No.
At all. Moving into ISKP and ISIS, who's leading it? Yeah,
so basically, when we talk about the ISIS, everyone knows, right? So that's Iraq and Syria, okay? People are so semantics with the words now. Like, you need to just say IS because you're not talking Iraq and Syria, but just ISIS is the easiest way. So ISIS is your Iraq, Syria one. So what has happened starting in 2020, the real ISIS took 200 people and they said, hey, we need to find a new safe haven. They tried Africa, it didn't work. We need to find a new safe haven. Let's go test the waters in places. So these 200 went to Baluchistan, Pakistan. They went to a small area called Panjgur, okay? And they settled there and they said, let's see if this works. There was some really strategic reasons why they chose it. Access to the sea through Baluchistan. The Baluchis are very supportive about attacks in Iran. ISIS wanted to focus more on Iran there. The Baluchis also in that area, which a lot of people don't understand who are aligned with ISIS, have Iranian, Pakistani, and Afghan citizenship. So they can run all the routes in that area and move freely between 3 countries, unlike other people would be able to. So anyway, they move these 200 people. They're like, it's safe. So then ISIS started moving all their senior leaders and then all like the heads of the committee. So like the Shura committee, the operational committee, the leadership committee, the media committee. So all of ISIS basically now is based in the Pakistan-Afghanistan border region in this Panjgur. So they have now deferred to the ISIS leader for the region, who is Sana Ullah Ghaffari. So Sana Ullah Ghaffari is actually the de facto head of real ISIS. So a Haqqani plant is the head of ISIS, which is the craziest thing ever that ISIS would even allow this to occur. I mean, but anyway, so that's kind of who is like running it. And so the leadership is based in Baluchistan. And then, like I told you, the ISKP kind of headquarters is in Konar. But then all the ISKP camps are in Pakistan. So the biggest camp is in Oversight, Pakistan. Oversight, again, is where the founder came from. And unfortunately, that camp is... the best way to put it is there is a problem in the Pakistani military because that camp is basically protected by Pakistan's Frontier Corps, which is a piece of the Pakistani military. And so they're kind of like the National Guard if you move the National Guard to the border. But when I served in Pakistan, so there's a big enclave, obviously all the embassies are on, right? And so every embassy has like, personal security, whatever company you would pay of local guards. But then outside those embassies, so on the streets around all the embassies in the enclave, it was protected by the Frontier Corps. So basically the Frontier Corps now is infiltrated by ISKP, right? They're harboring ISKP, they're working with ISKP, and I don't know where all the Frontier Corps is protecting the Americans and other foreigners in Pakistan, but this is a huge problem, as you can imagine. Like the insider threat potential of ISIS using them is a big concern.
How many kind of subsidiary organizations are there under ISIS?
Oh my gosh. So ISIS is one of those places, like everywhere they go, they make a branch. I think there's like 6 in Africa. Okay. So in Africa, they're the strongest in Mali, Somalia, and then Mozambique. Like in Mozambique, there's still 800,000 people displaced. Like people like aren't paying attention. Like this is still going on there. So those are, I'd say, the 3 biggest fighting wise, and then probably one of the richest is, like I said, the ISIS in Libya.
What is the size of ISKP in Afghanistan, Pakistan?
So I only have like the 2022 number, and that's about 7,000 bodies. So it's probably, higher than that. So the thing is, so I told you most of ISIS moved to Baluchistan, right? So there's about 5,000 like fighter type of ISIS still in Syria and Iraq. And then all the rest of the terrorists in Syria and Iraq are these new Al-Qaeda trainees coming in, okay? And then I totally just never lose my train of thought, and I totally lost my train of thought. So then...
we're kind of talking about the strength of ISIS in Afghanistan, Pakistan.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
And the subsidiary
I'm with you.
Organizations.
So the interesting part is a lot of Central Asians decided to join ISIS, okay? And they joined ISIS by going to Syria and fighting, okay? Now the Syria piece is draining down from ISIS. So those like Tajiks, Uzbeks, etc., now are leaving Syria, but they're staying in ISIS, but they're not going all the way to Baluchistan. They're not really senior leaders. So they're circling back and they're joining ISKP. So ISKP started as about 70% of it was formed from the Afghan Taliban and the Pakistani Taliban. About 15 to 20% of it now is kind of these Central Asian Tajiks. But the interesting part is people don't understand that that's still a small percentage of ISKP. They see 4 Tajik guys in the Moscow attacks and they're like, oh no, it's a Tajik organization now. And the Taliban and Al-Qaeda are worried, especially about Russia, and they're like, Russia's could bring problems for us. So now they're even spinning it, and they're even putting propaganda out. ISKP is a Tajik organization. It's a Central Asian organization. It's not an Afghan. It's like, no, guys, it's run by an Afghan. Sanullah Ghaffari grew up in damn Kabul, right? But they are trying to play that. And the interesting part is So ISKP does not think people understand how much they have in Pakistan, and most of their stuff's based in Pakistan because it's very hush-hush, right? So Sanullah Ghaffari left Konar, where he'd been, and he moved down to Panjshir just days ago because he doesn't think the Russians know ISIS senior leadership is based in Panjshir, and so he moved there for his safety. The interesting part is the Pakistanis have yet to take a strike on ISIS-KP anywhere in Pakistani territory. The only government or military that has tried to strike ISIS in Pakistan is Iran, of all things. So earlier this year, ISIS did
Iran tried to strike ISIS?
Yes. So earlier this year, Iran did the big suicide bombing at member Soleimani's 4-year memorial ceremony, and like 90 people were killed. Well, Iran was smart and knew ISIS had moved to Panjshir. So Iran did a strike into Panjshir trying to hit ISIS, and they missed them. And they hit another compound. So then they publicly said, oh, we are going after Jaish al-Adl. It's just the old Jandala. So they said, oh, because they didn't want to admit they missed ISIS. But yeah, Iran shot in and tried to hit ISIS senior leadership. But yeah, so anyway, there's only been one strike on the ISIS safe haven since it was started in 2022 in Baluchistan. So they do feel safe there, and they have been safe there.
It's weird how this is all kind of tying in. Is anybody from the Taliban going after ISIS?
Yeah. On paper, the GDI, which is the Taliban CIA, is supposed to be going after ISIS, and they're the ones getting like supposedly the majority of the ISIS dollars to hunt ISIS. So the Taliban only goes after ISIS if ISIS is impacting them in some way. So if ISIS is going to do an attack on them. So the really interesting part is, I told you, ISKP has some sort of affinity to the Haqqani side of the Taliban. The Taliban's broken into 2 sides, okay? 2 kind of warring factions. There's the Haqqani side, and then there's what we call the Kandahari Taliban side, okay?
Okay.
So obviously Siraj Haqqani is this one, right? That's clear. And then the Kandahari Taliban side is basically the head of the Taliban, Haibatullah, and then it's basically Mullah Omar's son, Yaqub, and then it's Mullah Barater, okay? So these 2 sides are constantly warring. So the interesting part is ISKP is mostly attacking the Kandahari Taliban side. I think there's only been maybe 1 attack that you could maybe call, and it's only because it was near the building that Siraj worked in, but I still don't know if that was really any attack on Haqqani. So anyway, that's who they're going after. So just you have to understand this nuance that they're not even attacking all parts of the Taliban. The other thing is the Taliban are keeping ISIS in play and not going against ISIS for any of their external plotting or training, etc., because they need ISIS to stay a threat. They need ISIS to have some successful attacks because they need to keep the U.S. ISIS dollars going in. So as long as you keep ISIS as a threat, you'll keep getting paid to go after them. The biggest issue with GDI right now is they're holding 2 Americans hostage. For everyone who Just heard that, yes, you're being lied to. The American in custody, Ryan Corbett, is locked in a cell with another American. It's never been made public. The Taliban are actually holding 3 Americans. Last week, the press finally realized it's 2, but they don't even know. So the Taliban's holding 3 Americans. 2 are locked in a cell together, okay? One, the family, the State Department for so long said, don't say it publicly. We're going to negotiate. We're going to get them out. And they didn't. And the family finally said, hey, we're going to make it public. The Taliban has, our family member. So we are paying them weekly to go after ISIS, and they basically have 2 Americans locked in their basement. And the worst part is there's kind of like this deteriorating health situation. So it used to be the 2 of them and a Brit. The Brit got out, and he almost died of sepsis, but he basically said, hey, when I was in, the only reason I stayed alive is the 2 Americans in there were like helping me keep me alive, because they're not getting kind of like much food or adequate nutrition. And if you're not feeling your body well, you have organs that break down. It affects the brain. So yeah, we also have 2 Americans who are basically like suffering like severe health consequences in GDI.
Who are they?
Ryan Corbett is one of them. And then the other one hasn't been made public. The other 2 Americans haven't been made public yet because State Department's doing something. But then the interesting part is, so that's the biggest problem. We should not be giving a penny to the organization holding Americans in their basement. The other piece is that a lot of people don't know is, so how GDI is structured, they have like different departments focused on different things. So they have one department, it's kind of like translates to the immigrants department, and that department solely funds and supports the Pakistani Taliban. So the tricky Taliban Pakistan I told you about, they're the ones doing all the attacks right now in Pakistan. GDI has a unit that just supports them. And the really interesting thing that a lot of people don't understand is the Taliban has gotten really smart, okay? So if you worked in Afghanistan everyone says everything's ISI in Pakistan, right? And then when you work in Pakistan, every attack is, oh, it's the Indians or the Afghans, right? And so the Afghan Taliban is like, why not use that to our advantage? So what they're doing is they're rotating Taliban units into the TTP in Pakistan and being involved in the attacks, right? So they're doing all these attacks. They did like 800 attacks in the last year in Pakistan. They've completely resurged into one of the biggest terrorist groups in the region. Now, think about it. When the Pakistani military comes and kills 8 guys and say, well, 2 are Afghan Taliban, everyone's like, yeah, you're crazy. You're just calling them Afghan because you're Pakistanis, and you always did that when they weren't Afghan. So yeah, they're basically doing these attacks right now in Pakistan, part of their Fatah war plan, and nobody actually knows that that's the Afghan Taliban doing it. So that's one department of the GDI, and that affects Pakistan. But TTP has attacked us. TTP did the Marriott bombing that killed Americans, and TTP did the Peshawar consulate. So it's an American group we focus on. Now, the 12th department of the GDI is the most interesting. So the 12th department's job, their only job is to protect al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. So they have branches over the whole country and all their intelligence shops, and their jobs are very simple. Okay, well, they protect the 30 al-Qaeda training camps. They do all the vetting. So any new recruit, it could be Afghan, it could be Jordanian, Syrian, Egyptian. They do the vetting for the new recruits before they start training camp. They do all the movements. So they move all the new trainees in, they move them around, they move all the senior leadership of the al-Qaeda around, and then what they do is when they move al-Qaeda senior leadership around, they put them in their own houses, right? Because they know we got a relationship with the U.S. government. They're not going to strike us, so they're actually harboring them inside their own houses. And then they're basically in control of, they're helping protect al-Qaeda's money, like their cash holdings in Afghanistan, which they have very large cash holdings, as I told you, even just the small mine piece. And then they're doing all the border movements for al-Qaeda. So there is one unit in the GDI, their sole job is supporting al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. That's it.
Man, what? It's, so Taliban is aligned with Iran, correct?
Yes.
And so that means Al-Qaeda
is
obviously aligned with Iran too.
Yeah.
And so is that why Taliban and ISIS are kind of fighting? Is it because of, what stemmed that?
So basically, what stemmed that, it kind of touches, your nuance is interesting. So years ago, Al-Qaeda and ISIS, as ISIS was coming to in Afghanistan, there was now a new leader of the Taliban. His name is Akhtar Mohammed Mansour, okay? So he becomes the leader of the Taliban, and he wants to make it more cohesive between the Taliban in Afghanistan and Iran. He's like, I want to bring us closer together. ISIS, who was kind of like new forming and getting their feet wet, they're like, no, like we want to make the Shia a target for ISIS and we don't want to stop. And Mansour is like, no, like you will not target Shia. We will not let it happen. And that's kind of when the big rubber hit the road between ISIS and the Taliban. And so even people left the Taliban then and said, no, we're going to join ISIS. Like you're being too wishy-washy on this subject. And so that is kind of where it started, kind of this being able to attack Shia. But it wasn't exactly to do with Iranian senior leadership. It was just having the targets free to still be going after the Iranian targets.
How long has this been going on?
I don't know. He was maybe killed maybe 6 years.
6 years? Who do you consider to be more powerful, AQ, Taliban, or ISIS?
Taliban on paper is the most powerful, but Al-Qaeda is still the most capable, and then ISIS has just been the one who can get the most press. But when we look at numbers, ISIS doesn't even come close, right? So, like, if we take all the ISIS in Iraq and Syria, what we think is in Baluchistan and the training camps, ISIS is no more than 20K, right, between those few countries, like 20,000 members, right?
Okay.
The Taliban alone in the last 2 years recruited 170,000 new members to their military, okay? So the numbers are huge for the Taliban. Al-Qaeda in those 30 camps have recruited, like by the end of this year, they will have 100,000 new trained recruits, right? So Al-Qaeda is so much bigger right now than ISIS. They're just not doing the spectacular attacks to get the attention, right? Because it doesn't benefit them right now because they want to do these quiet attacks in Iraq and Syria and everyone think it's ISIS, which they seem to be working successfully. And then they want to focus on the war plan.
Okay. Man. Moving back to Afghanistan, how many of our allies have been captured since we pulled out of there?
Yeah, so these numbers are pretty sombering. They were asked recently on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, and of course our military leaders didn't even know them, right? Which is really frustrating. So I'll do like killed, captured. So the number of our allies killed right now is just over 10,000. The number of our allies captured is 30,000. 18,000 of the 30,000 have gone through kind of like this this fake justice system. I don't know what you call it. They basically go through whatever Taliban Sharia law court is, and then you get a prison sentence or you get executed or whatever they decide your fate is. 12,000 are completely missing from the ally count. We don't know if they're dead, being tortured. There's all these secret prisons. There's like a GDI has secret prisons. The MOI, the Ministry of Interior, has a secret prison. The MOD, Ministry of Defense, has secret prisons. There's a freaking secret prison in Gecko Base. There's a secret prison in Helmand. So it's very unclear, right, who of the 12,000 is alive and who's dead. Now, I'm just talking allies. So we have 12,000 missing allies. There are 70,000 missing Afghans altogether.
70,000?
Yes. That are in one of these secret prisons or dead and their family has not been notified because the Taliban came and they disappeared and never saw them again. So see, the numbers are staggering. And then I just
want to, for the audience who are wondering what allies we're talking about,
Sure.
We're talking about the the Afghans that we were partnered with, that we were training, that we were fighting with alongside for 20 years.
Yeah. When I'm talking allies, I'm pretty much only talking the military and police that worked with us.
Yeah.
Basically, there's 200,000 of them in this bucket, okay, in Afghanistan. And so what the Taliban has done is they've gone in and taken their property, taken their homes, right, taken their properties, taken their businesses. They've pushed them off their land. Heck, they've cut power. I know some that the Taliban cut power 2 years ago and refused to put it back on. Like one guy was because he was a police officer, like they won't put the power back on in his house. So people need to understand there's 200,000 of these being impacted just of our allies. They've already killed 10,000 of them. And remember, in the 20 plus years of war we were in, just under 2,500 Americans died. In 2.5 years, 10,000 of these police and military died. And remember, those aren't the numbers even that include the women who've been killed or any of that. The women, the ones who've been able to report, 80,000 have reported rape in the last 2.5 years, and 15,000 children have reported rape in the last 2.5 years. And these are people capable of reporting. Most of these people are prisoners in their own house and can't even get out and say, something has happened to me. I've been impacted by something.
Man, that is just so sad. I've seen the videos of what they're doing to them. And
the torture videos are horrible that they're sending to Americans.
It's a disgrace. Mm-hmm. That we just abandoned them like that, just at the drop of a dime.
Yep.
What do you think's going to happen if we have to go back in there? Do you think any of these people are going to partner with Americans ever again?
Yeah. Well, I think they will, because a lot of my information comes from people still willing to partner with Americans, right? The thing is, though, I do not think we should do U.S. troops on the ground, because we lost in Afghanistan because of U.S. policy. U.S. policy is not going to change where we fight a better war against terrorism. No way. I mean, we even see that with while we're trying to dictate Israel's war, right? The U.S. are not going to go and eliminate a terrorist group. In Afghanistan, we don't have it in us, right?
Yeah.
And I watched it. I got to watch it in East Libya. I got to watch General Haftar do it, right? He did it the way he needed to do it, and he was very successful. But that is not the way the Americans are going to do it. So I think the Americans should and will end up be supporting the anti-Taliban resistance, probably the Pakistani military. But the Pakistani military, we got to deal with some major issues, right? Especially the fact that they are almost stuck with their only lever being ISIS, which is crazy, right? But they need to realize, like, ISIS is not a lever, right? Like, there no good comes from any government who uses ISIS against other groups, right? So we have to deal something with, we gotta, like, maybe take the money we're giving to Taliban and ISIS and give it to, like, the resistance of Pakistan. Like, we have to do something to break Pakistan giving ISIS the safe haven. But anyway, because remember, all those years we fought in Afghanistan, terrorists fell back to Pakistan, right? And luckily we did capture and kill some there, but that's still a safe haven for them. So even if, let's say we fund the resistance like we're doing Ukraine or something, and they go in, if a bunch of terrorists fall back to Pakistan and they can't action them, we get back to the same situation, right? Like, we have to keep the terrorists contained in Afghanistan and get them in Afghanistan. Like, that is what needs to be done. And we got into this mess with Pakistan years ago when we funded the old Mujahideen against the Soviets, right? And I do think the only way out of this and the only way to deal with this insane terrorist safe haven in Afghanistan is we got to do it with Pakistan, and we got to do it with the anti-Taliban resistance. And somehow we got to get the anti-Taliban resistance in Pakistan to be like, guess what? Water under the bridge, a lot of bad history, but like the future is worse. Like, we have to work together, and I think that's going to be any future of a success.
Man, since the last time we spoke, you had mentioned that there are Benghazi terrorists in Afghanistan. Have there been any developments on that?
Mostly just the fact that, like I said, we've confirmed their locations. We told you we've identified. So remember, we found Musa. Mm-hmm. And then we proved that he is making these passports, right? Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the key thing we've been working on in terms of Afghanistan. And then, as you can imagine, there's others in the hopper that we think are going to move to Afghanistan. And so we're working on them. And then
are they key players?
Key players.
What do you think they'll be doing?
To be honest, some are probably going to take senior leadership roles in Al-Qaeda. So we have this second generation issue, if that makes sense. So when the Benghazi attacks happened, we killed a terrorist named Abu Yahya al-Libi, right? Like, he has sons now, right? Like, where are his sons? There's another senior terrorist, Abu Faraj al-Libi. Where are his sons? We had the planner of the Kenzi and Tanzania attacks, Abu Anas al-Libi, that we captured in Libya. His son now is Al-Qaeda, right? So there's the second generation that, if they didn't grow up in Afghanistan, they now want to move in and do kind of basically what their fathers did and move up in the ranks and be this next generation of Al-Qaeda. And that's being completely ignored. So we're trying to, at least the best we can in our investigation, try to figure out where these second generation are. And the crazy part is, he wasn't one of our attackers, but there is a second generation Al-Qaeda guy. He's now running Al-Qaeda kind of in the northern part of Afghanistan. He's the key Al-Qaeda commander, and his son, of all things, it went the other way. His son just showed up in Libya. His son's never lived in Libya. He moved to Afghanistan during the Mujahideen era. He spent years in Bosnia. The Russians captured him in Bosnia, locked him up. At some point they released him. The son has only ever lived in Afghanistan, and then he just showed up in Libya this week. It's like, okay, now what's going on? So there's this huge gap in the second generation of these terrorists that I don't think anyone is collecting on.
Man, go figure. Well, on that note, let's take a break, and then when we come back, we'll get into where the money's going.
Perfect.
How many guys out there are worried about brain health? All we hear about is fitness. Everybody's getting ready for bikini season because spring's right around the corner. I'm personally more concerned about my brain. You look around, you see all these brain diseases that are getting out of control. I'm going to take everything I can to improve the health of my brain. And I'm going to tell you about my 5 favorite supplements from Laird Superfoods that help with brain health. All right, the first thing I do every morning is I have Laird Superfood Creamer. It's got adaptogens and functional mushrooms, which are great for brain health. I put this in my tea. Tastes amazing. Who likes vegetables? Cool, me neither. That's why I take Laird's Daily Greens. Just pour it in a cup, shoot it real quick, you got your daily vegetable intake. Plus, guess what? Yep, that's right, functional mushroom extract. There's 6 different kinds in here. Once again, great for brain health. After greens, we got daily reds. This one doesn't actually have any functional mushrooms in it, but I can't stand beets. I think they taste like shit. And so I take 1 scoop of this, put it in my water, and I don't have to eat beets anymore. All right, we're winding down the day now. This is the next supplement I take every single night. Laird's Sleep and Recovery. Helps me sleep, helps me recover from my daily workout. And guess what? Yep, you're right. It has mushroom extract. Guess what? It's good for your brain. And I saved the best for last. Most of you know this. My favorite supplement at Laird's is Performance Mushrooms. Has a ton of mushroom extract. Super, super good for your brain. Take it every single day, sometimes multiple times a day. These are my 5 favorite supplements from Laird Superfoods. You can go over to lairdsuperfoods.com, use the promo code SRS, save 20%. Ladies and gents, I would not have partnered with this company if I didn't believe in them. They take the cleanest ingredients. They try to source everything in America unless they find a better ingredient that's more quality somewhere else. I think we can all appreciate that. Once again, lairdsuperfoods.com. Use the promo code SRS. That'll save you 20%.
Join me and my special guest for the next behind-the-scenes experience exclusively available on Vigilance Elite Patreon. The behind-the-scenes footage is raw and uncut. This is as close to the set as you can possibly get. You can expect anything from off-topic conversations, studio tours, the final moments before the interview starts, and everything in between. The behind-the-scenes content is constantly evolving and will continue to bring you more as we grow. You can gain access for just $15 a month exclusively at Vigilance Elite Patreon.
All right, Sarah, we're back from the break. Downstairs, we had a kind of an offshoot discussion about how terrorists are misusing the U.S. justice system. Can you go into that a little bit for the audience?
Yeah, we touched on this in our book, but I want to give the full details of actually what's happening so people understand. So, at least in the case of Benghazi, we have 2 terrorist families who are using the U.S. justice system to basically do court cases against the people doing the counterterrorism operations against them. So they're basically counting operations against terrorists as war crimes. I mean, if you can understand how this becomes a problem. So the 2 families I want to talk about really briefly, one of the terrorists that are attacked, his name is Ali al-Qarshini, okay? Long story short, he was with the group Ansar al-Shari Benghazi the night of the attacks. Before that, he was with the Egyptian Islamic Jihad. That was the group that Dr. Ayman al-Zawahiri, the head of al-Qaeda that directed our attacks, that's the group he originally came from. So Qarshini, the night of the attacks, he was one of the commanders. How that terrorist group set it up is each commander for each district in town became the commander of the terrorists under them at the attack. So he was the commander from his district, and then all the commanders who reported to the AQ's head for Libya for AQIM. He was named Omar Shalali. So just so you know, in the org structure. So this is one of the senior commanders leading terrorists at our consulate attack, okay? Then 2 years later in Libya, they capture, the Jordanian ambassador, and he holds a Jordanian ambassador in his house. He does this actually with the FBI witness I told you about. That's another crime the FBI witness was involved in. Besides killing the intelligence officer, he was involved in the kidnapping of the Jordanian ambassador in 2014. So in May of 2014, there's a prisoner exchange. They release a very senior al-Qaeda terrorist, and the Jordanian ambassador gets freed, okay? So the Libyan National Army obviously sets up operation to go after the property, as you can imagine, the ambassador was held at. So in October of that year, they raid the property, the Qarshini house where the ambassador was kept. They found millions upon millions of US dollars, Libyan dinar, weapons, official documents for Ansar al-Shari Benghazi, all in this family compound, okay? During the raid, the terrorist who attacked us, Qarshini, died. His family that owns that house are suing General Haftar right now in a US court for this raid that killed the terrorists that attacked us. Isn't that crazy? So that's one piece of the court case. The second piece is another family called the Bin Suwaids. So the Bin Suwaids are just a huge terrorist family. I know of 10 terrorists in their family, okay? So it was this cell of their family basically ran an assassination cell in Benghazi, and they were killing all the police and military, anyone who wanted to become a judge. You know how I explained how all those assassinations were happening that al-Qaeda's Abu Nasr al-Libi set up. So they were one of these assassination cells. Well, when General Haftar went to kick off his Operation Dignity, that's the big counterterrorism operation that started in 2014 against the attackers, the neighborhood these terrorists lived in said, hey, in this neighborhood, we're going to support the Libyan National Army. That was Haftar's force. Nobody fights the LNA. So as this war is kicking off, one of the first days, the LNA are moving around, and there's basically gunfire coming from the Suwaids house. So the Suwaids, when we were in Benghazi, they're the house that had all the black flags. This is a very extreme family. So they start just randomly shooting. I don't even know if they have a target at that point. So the residents in the neighborhood are what the heck are you doing? And so they all mobbed the house. And so the residents mobbed the house, and then there was a small group in that neighborhood, one in multiple neighborhoods. It was called Guardians of the Blood. It was basically a vigilante group that went after the people who were killing the good guys. So they were involved in this too. And so they get to the house, and then they actually they said, women and children, you can leave the house. And they left the house. And then it became a whole fight and a gunfire. And then these 3, a father and 2 sons, died. So the Libyan National Army weren't even at the house doing this. That family is also involved in the court case here in the United States. A Libyan family, remember, these are no Americans involved. A Libyan family is suing General Haftar for war crimes in that case when his people didn't even kill that family. Now, the one thing that matters to us in Benghazi is this family, of the 10 terrorists I told you about, 2 family members have been involved in killing Americans. One is Salim bin Suwaid. So he was involved in the 2002 assassination of Larry Foley, the USAID worker in Jordan. Luckily, Jordanians captured him and they executed him 2 years later. That's how you should be handling terrorists. And then Saleh bin Suwaid, we've never released him yet because I don't have his photo. So if anyone has their photo and they want to send it to me, we can release him. He was one of our 2012 Benghazi attackers. So he was involved in the deaths of, Ambassador Stevens and Shawn Smith. And again, so these terrorist families are getting to use our system. So then you ask, right, how are Libyans able to even afford a court case in America? Because that's what I asked. Mm-hmm. So the Karshinis are very wealthy. So the one with the first terrorists, they run kind of like granite company. So they're a wealthy family. The Suwaids were poor as crap when we were there. We realized they've become rich over the years, a little bit through kind of shady NGO stuff, but we actually ended up finding out a part of their cases seemed to be funded by the Muslim Brotherhood. What a lot of people don't understand is, so the Muslim Brotherhood is banned in Egypt, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates. It's not banned in America. And the reason it's not banned in America, which is crazy, right, is because it makes so much money. It's this giant lobbying firm, and I don't like to get political, but it brings a lot of money to the Democratic Party. So I don't think Muslim Brotherhood is going to be banned here, but it's a problem because Muslim Brotherhood influences things, and Muslim Brotherhood will fund cases in our systems that support extremism, different terrorist things, that type of thing. So in this case, because the Muslim Brotherhood member lives in America, I'm not going to say his name, but here's a little story about 3 brothers, okay? One lives in America, he's in Virginia, he's a surgeon, okay? So he's the one that basically kind of went to these families, hey, what kind of support do you need from the Muslim Brotherhood? His Muslim Brotherhood cover in the United States is he runs a bunch of Libyan American organizations. They have relationships with the State Department. Even a year after our attacks, there is a group letter. It was Libyans and American diplomats, and it said, hey, we know Ambassador Stevens died a year ago, but you're kind of ignoring Libya. We want you to do more, do more with the Libyans and the Libyan government. He signed that letter, right? So it's this lobbying thing for Libya. So he's involved, okay? And then he has 2 brothers. He has another brother who is a Libyan ambassador, right? So we got an American, we got a Libyan politician. The third brother is Al-Qaeda. So he's been Al-Qaeda since the 90s. He moved to Bosnia and fought with the Mujahideen in the Bosnia War, and then he stayed there. And now he's obviously older. And so what he does now is he facilitates Al-Qaeda and ISIS members through Europe. The thing he mostly focuses on is the injured ones, they fought somewhere, and then he brings them to Europe to get medical attention. So one of our attackers that we identified in May, Jabril al-Kepti, we actually found out that this third brother, the Al-Qaeda guy, brought Jabril and 9 other ISIS members from Turkey over to Bosnia to get medical treatment. And the interesting part is we got the names of all 10 terrorists in our investigation and their passports. And I actually it happened in 2016, and I put a little post on it. LinkedIn took it down, right? It's they're protecting me talking about ISIS moving around Europe, and they actually took the post down. It's just another one of the censorship things. So anyway, people need to understand, we don't like to talk about Muslim Brotherhood too much because it gets conspiratorial, but Muslim Brotherhood, is impacting our justice system, and we're allowing them by not banning them. So we need to ban them in America.
Well, that's good intel that everybody needs to hear. Thank you for bringing that up. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about AQIM. Since the attacks, how are they connected with Afghanistan?
Yeah. I mean, like I told you, that commander on the ground that Karshini reported to was the AQIM head, right, for Libya, right? So AQIM carried our attacks on the ground on behalf of core al-Qaeda. What happened recently, and since the last time I came here, is a bunch of US dollars showed up with AQIM in Africa, and it's well, where did this money come from, right? And I was told oh, this money was given to the Taliban to fight ISIS. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, this money was given in Kabul? Yes. So money given by the U.S. government in Kabul ended up with AQIM in Africa. Just think about that. Our U.S. dollars that we sent bundled on airplanes. So as you can imagine, that got me pissed.
Yeah.
It's like, I've already complained about you funding our attackers, and now like you're funding like basically like you're still funding them like a decade later, and you're just basically like doing it through Afghanistan. So then, as you can imagine, we started looking into how it happened.
Let's get into the money. Mm-hmm. This is the section I've been waiting on.
Yes.
Let's get into how the U.S. is funding terrorist organizations.
Perfect.
Specifically, you want to start with Taliban?
Yeah. I mean, it'll all go connect. So this is just to be a long response probably. But I want to talk about the buckets of money first, if that makes sense.
Yeah, please do.
So there's 3 big buckets of money. And then we focused on the third. So the first bucket of money it was $7 billion. And this was just basically the bank reserves the government of Afghanistan owned when it fell. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So it was offsite, right? It was here. So $7 billion. Mm-hmm. So basically what the U.S. government has done with this $7 billion is they split it in half and said, we're going to give $3.5 billion to the victims of 9/11. If anyone from victims of 9/11 have gotten any of this $3.5 billion, which is earning insane interest monthly, please let me know, because I've yet to meet someone besides lawyers who made any money. So someone needs to be on this $3.5 billion that the U.S. siphoned off and figure out where it is, what's happening to it, and what people are doing with it. So we didn't even look into that piece. So the other $3.5 billion got taken and put in a Swiss bank account. This is so what we saw from. So in Libya, there was $200 billion that went missing. Okay, completely different situation. $200 billion of Gaddafi's money is like gone. So we get very concerned when something moves to Switzerland. So $3.5 billion moves to Switzerland, and now this is given to the Taliban. So the $3.5 billion belongs to the Taliban government. It's overseen by 4 individuals in Switzerland, a State Department officer, which is crazy. Like, I could see Department of Treasury, Commerce, like put a real money person on it. So a State Department officer, a Swiss diplomat, and then 2 Afghans. One Afghan kind of makes sense. He was basically the head of their finance department way back when, kind of when the Taliban first started taking over. He at least has a background. And then the last Taliban guy, it's very strange. I don't like to say rumors, but there might be some sort of nepotism that got them into that role. And the nepotism might involve family connected to our envoy. So we have an envoy to Afghanistan, Tom West. Lots of issues involving him and his sympathies towards the Taliban. Even after the fall of Afghanistan, he actually said, we will do anything at all costs to recognize the Taliban. So this is the broker we have, right? He'll do anything at all costs to recognize the Taliban? Are you kidding me, right? So this guy's already a problem. So these are the people. So it's just these 4 people overseeing this $3.5 billion. It's already earned like over $180 million in interest. And then, so I've asked around to see, has the Taliban taken any money from it? And then I get mixed responses. Some people say they haven't touched it. Some people say, well, we think they paid they owed the Uzbekistan all this money for it's kind of like electricity bills. And they did pay off Uzbekistan. Some say it came from that money, some say they don't. The interesting part in the Uzbekistan piece is the Taliban is paying them off and clearing those debts. Because if you remember, it was like around June of 2021, before the fall of Kabul, the U.S. military actually told the pilots, hey, in case of emergency, fly the planes to Uzbekistan. That's why all those planes flew to Uzbekistan. U.S. military texted and told Afghan pilots to do that. So all these planes, as you can imagine, are still sitting in Uzbekistan, and the Taliban want the planes back, right? So they're trying to make nice with Uzbekistan to give the planes back. Like, Uzbekistan, don't give the planes back. So anyway, so that's that. So anyway, 3.5 million Taliban has access to, okay?
Billion.
Billion.
Can I ask
Can't even talk.
who's the State Department official overseeing this?
I don't know the name of the State Department person.
Do you think it's it's obviously a Taliban sympathizer, correct?
Most likely. So that's that. I didn't really look at that money because obviously the 3.5 billion is not where the money came from AQIM, right? So then there's a second pocket of money, which everyone tells us is the 40 million a week that comes on the airplane and comes into Afghanistan. The interesting part is I was like, well, is it 40 million a week, right? Because you got to ask these questions because, there's not been a lot of honesty. So the plane comes in weekly. The amount of money on the plane weekly is 43 million to 87 million. Like, that's a big stretch. If you tell me it has 40 million on the plane and the plane is arriving with $87 million. So let's just talk about the 40 million piece. So that 40 million piece gets taken from the plane. It's brought to like Afghanistan International Bank, which as you can imagine is making so much money off the exchange of this insane amount of money weekly. And then it's supposed to then go all to humanitarian aid, right? It's obviously not happening that way. 70% is getting siphoned off and going to Taliban-only causes, and the majority of that is to the Taliban military. So the way the Taliban's doing it, they're doing the most basic thing like bribes, but that doesn't get you to 70%. Then they've done this thing where every NGO that collects money from this pot of the 40 million has to have a Taliban representative basically like on their board. So Taliban has complete control as a board member of where the money goes. The last part, which is the smartest thing they did, is as you can imagine, there's a lot of these long-standing NGOs in Afghanistan the State Department has relationships with. Well, Taliban just went in and gutted them completely and put all Taliban in them. So State Department will say, oh, we've had a 12-year relationship with them. We have this record. And they're not being honest and telling you, oh, well, the NGO we had a relationship with, none of them work there anymore, and it's all now just Taliban. So that's the key way they're siphoning this money. So I'm not going to spend too much time on that bucket, but one thing I want Americans to understand is in that bucket of the 40 million we send each week, we are paying basically welfare to the Taliban martyrs' families. So every Taliban member who died during the war with us, the U.S. government is paying them a stipend, the family. So our families of Americans who died there aren't getting squat, but we are paying Taliban families for basically dying while attacking us.
Whoa.
Yes, we're funding that.
This is just enraging.
And, I asked a couple of people that question straight out, like, do you not think this is not ethically correct? And actually, one person gave me an answer of, well, it'll stop them from joining ISIS. I'm like, the Taliban guy's already dead. Like, they give you these bullshit excuses as to why they're funding, like, our enemies. So...
Well, I think that's a huge problem in America to begin with, is making excuses.
For terrorist sympathizing. And not paying attention to the fucking money. Okay, so that's bucket 2. Bucket 3 is the most interesting, right? So bucket 3 is the ISIS dollars, right? So nobody knows the amount of the ISIS dollars because there's all these classified annexes on the Doha deal that have never been released. Congress needs to release them because it's time that we know what they say. But anyway, so that other money on the airplane is the ISIS dollars, okay? So... guess what was done?
What?
Well, what do you do? What do people do when they like to follow terrorists around? We followed the money. Mm-hmm. So the money's all the money in the airplane is supposed to go to the Afghan International Bank and go to humanitarian aid. Well, a big chunk of the money comes off the airplane and goes other places, and it has 8 stops. So you ready for them? I'll just do the 8 stops and then we'll talk through each of them because it'll be easier and maybe I'll remember it better. First stop. So this is the delivery weekly of U.S. dollars. It goes to the Prime Minister of the Taliban. So his name is Mullah Mohammed Hassan Akhund, okay? The second delivery goes to my favorite person, the Deputy Prime Minister, Mullah Burader. The third delivery goes to the GDI, who I told you is Taliban, CIA. It's run by Abdul Haq Wasik, if you remember. He was one of the ones released for Bergdahl. So far, by the way, Mohammed, number one, Barreder, and Wasik. These are all sanctioned designated terrorists. So all three of these deliveries are against U.S. and international law, by the way, okay? The next delivery goes to the Ministry of Interior, which I told you already is led by Sirajuddin Haqqani, and that's where all the passports are being made for terrorists. The fifth one, Siraj is double dipping. Then they do a delivery to his house. So delivery number 5 goes to the home of Sirajuddin Haqqani, which should blow people's mind. This man sent 1,050 suicide bombers at U.S. and NATO troops. Over 1,000 suicide bombers were sent by him alone. And the U.S. is dropping cash off at his house weekly. Like, it's mind-blowing. Then, I'm almost like losing track where we are. The next delivery goes to Hibatullah Akhundzada, who's the head of the Taliban. The next delivery goes to Saif al-Adil, who is basically the head of Al-Qaeda's military commission. And then the last delivery goes to 3 people. But I think we wait, because if I do that one, we're going to have to talk about the first 7 deliveries, if that's okay.
Okay.
So we'll come back.
Let's start with number 1.
Yeah. So number 1, like I said, Prime Minister of the Taliban, designated. He's an interesting fella. He is basically... So he got put in his role because they thought, hey, he's longtime Mullah Omar supporter. He will stay in line with the Taliban. Like, he's the right person for the job. The interesting part is publicly he backs the head of the Taliban on everything. Privately, because during those 20 years we were fighting, he got very, very wealthy off Taliban funds and did a lot of investments in Pakistan. So he has like these natural leanings towards the Pakistanis because he has huge financial investments there. So he's kind of a little two-faced. He's playing the Taliban and playing Pakistan, right? So in case he needs the fallback location of Pakistan. And what a lot of people don't know is he's not going to be in his position long because Hibatullah has been trying to move him out. He's trying to put his chief of staff there, but he has cancer. And so he's having to go to Pakistan for cancer treatments, as you can imagine, because 5 million people fled Afghanistan, and who all fled? The educated, the good doctors. So he has to go to Pakistan to get proper medical attention because he can't get in Afghanistan. So that's basically our first delivery. The second delivery, like I told you, goes to Mullah Barreder, who we already talked about, right? Went to Iran, made this deal with the Iranians and Al-Qaeda to send Al-Qaeda guys to attack U.S. and Israeli troops. Huge violation of the Doha deal. Just the Iran, just this Iran deal. Huge violation, right? There are so many violations of this Doha deal we have with the Taliban, and no one's negating it and keeps letting this money come. But even well before the fall of Kabul, there is a huge violation of the Doha deal. Like, the Taliban detained an American named Mark Frykes, right? And basically what happened is we had a special envoy before West who was just as bad as West, with his Ross Wilson. And he knew the Taliban detained Mark, and they downplayed it because they didn't want this fake peace deal to go through. So like, no, it's not the Taliban, it's people trying to ruin peace. And they downplayed it. And then, of course, around the fall of Kabul is when we got Mark, after the fall, and we released him for the number 1 narco trafficker in Afghanistan that the Taliban run, right? So the Taliban had him the whole time. Basically, the State Department lied and downplayed it to keep the Doha deal going. So just let you know this.
Can you explain the Doha deal real quick?
Yeah.
So everybody understands what that is?
Yeah, honestly, I don't even understand the Doha deal, but yeah. Doha deal was essentially the U.S. brokered what they call a peace deal, but it's not. They brokered a deal only with the Taliban for the future of Afghanistan. And in this deal, basically, they made all these promises, and unfortunately, the promises are in a lot of these secret annexes, but they made a bunch of promises to the Taliban, not to the allies we've been fighting for 20 years, that we would stop supplying the Afghan military. The Taliban in return would stop attacking us. There's all this back and forth, but essentially, we made all the promises that we were first going to abandon the Afghan military for the Taliban, and then we were going to leave completely. And then we gave the Taliban a bunch of concessions, and then the Taliban wasn't allowed to commit attacks against us and do all these type of things.
Okay. Yeah, I thought it was something about bringing peace to Afghanistan for the next 20 plus years.
Which isn't true.
Something.
Yeah. So what a lot of people don't realize, they call it a peace deal. That's just the lie. That's putting like paint on a pig. This deal was only a negotiation with the Taliban. It did not include like parliament. It didn't include the Afghan military. It didn't include any kind of different sectarian groups in Afghanistan. It was the U.S. and the Taliban. So just so everybody knows, this was only a deal with the enemy. It would never have brought peace to Afghanistan because we only dealt with like the bad guys in Afghanistan. We didn't even include the good guys. And then we screwed the good guys over by taking all supplies from them and let them fall, right? So this was to give basically Afghanistan, which ended up being back to the Taliban, because somehow in our government, they think that the Afghans want the Taliban. It's a broken system. I saw it already forming. In 2010, they were doing reconciliation with the Taliban, and the train had left the station, and this is kind of like the end result of really bad assessment.
I got another question
Yep.
before we move on to bucket 3, but I don't
Sure.
want to. Is it? So you had mentioned that on the plane, I believe you said there is Taliban money and ISIS money.
Well, money to fight ISIS, so it's all Taliban
Okay,
money.
money to fight. Okay, I misunderstood.
Yes.
Then I was okay.
No worries.
That negates it.
Don't start any rumors.
All
No,
right,
kidding.
all right. No, thank you for clarifying. So, all right, bucket 3.
Okay, yeah. So I got to remember who we talked about now. Yeah. GDI, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we spent a lot of time on GDI, so I don't think we have to do much on GDI. But again, it's Taliban's intel organization, and obviously they're holding Ryan Corbett and secretly another American in a cell. Then the fourth one is Ministry of Interior. We spent a lot of time on that. The interesting part, though, is, when we talk about this threat to us, right, from these fake passports, but there's also a threat going on, as you can imagine, to our allies. So, I'm saying they captured 30,000, but then there's like 70,000 missing total. They killed 10,000. They're able to do this because they're using biometrics, right? Biometrics we left behind. Those biometrics sit in the Ministry of Interior building, right? So I want people to understand, like, the Taliban are like really targeting these people, and that's how they're finding them and getting them. What a lot of people don't understand is kind of within the first year after the fall, the Taliban didn't really have the biometrics up and running. So they almost faked it, right? Like I once worked at a theme park and we had an annual pass, and like you stuck it in the machine and then you put your fingerprint on, but the fingerprint didn't work. It was just to dissuade people from handing their pass, so you thought it was fingerprint enabled. And so the Taliban for kind of a year faked, hey, our biometrics are working. Then they went to like the Chinese and the Iranians and they said, hey, help us fix, we can't get this all working. So they got the system working, and then they got it deployed on mobile devices, right? So now it's at the border crossings. So I want Afghans to understand, if you went through a border crossing like 6 months after the fall and you were fine, don't assume you're fine now, because they didn't have it working then, even though they pretended it. Now they do. So they have the entire passport database working, the entire criminal database. They have the entire PACE system for the Ministry of Interior and the Afghan Army, so our allies. They have the entire PACE system for the NDS, which was the Afghan CIA, and they have the entire PACE system for the Supreme Court. So this is what the Taliban is basically using these PACE systems to then go find the allies. So they know they have the right guy because it's tied back to their damn payroll.
That's terrifying.
So you could change your name, but it doesn't matter. They'll take your fingerprint and say, oh, we know exactly who you are. It's so horrible. It's like the biggest case of targeting I've ever seen, and they're doing it successfully, and they're allowed to, and they're getting away with it.
How long has this been happening?
I mean, it's been running pretty good for, at least since we found Musa. It's been at least up and running since 6 months, like fully running. Obviously, it took time as they put pieces into place, but they have access to all of it now.
Damn. These guys don't have a chance.
I know. I mean, we left them for the slaughter. I mean, there's no other way to put it.
Let's go on to the next one.
Yeah, so then the next one is Sirajuddin Haqqani. I mean, we've spent a lot of time on Sirajuddin Haqqani, but there's so much on Sirajuddin Haqqani. Like, it's almost one, it's like I even want to explain more, right? I mean, obviously we explained he has this relationship with Boko Haram. He has the Al-Qaeda and Libya relationship. He has, the ISKP. He also, though, has the Pakistan relationship. So many, many years ago, when the U.S. and the Pakistanis funded the Mujahideen, one of the people we funded was his father, Jalaluddin Haqqani. Their huge compound in Waziristan, like the United States built that, right? So the Haqqanis are almost Pakistani, right? And so Siraj basically plays the Pakistan side of things too, because remember, he has this war with the Kandahari Taliban. I mean, I think it's either Siraj is going to end up dead or Haibatullah is going to end up dead, but maybe not. Maybe one just gets pushed out. So Siraj's plan is, worst comes to worst, I fall back to Waziristan. Pakistan supports me. So Siraj is playing some interesting games. So one of the things he did recently to appease the Pakistanis is Pakistan, like I told you, has been complaining, hey, all these weapons are showing up, these M4s, M16s. Siraj, you got to do something about this, So he's like, okay. And he does this weird pandering to them because they're like, take the weapons from TTP. So instead of taking the weapons from TTP, what they asked him to do, he did this weird thing where, so the Haqqanis have a special operations unit called the Badri unit, okay? They recruited a bunch of Pakistani Waziristan people. They gave them like money, cars, houses, or like join our unit. So they then became a part of the Badri unit. So what Siraj did to appease the Pakistanis, he just took the weapons from the Waziris in the Badri unit. He didn't go take weapons from TTP. And so he goes, hey guys, I got to take these weapons back. They belong, the government of Afghanistan, you're not Afghan, some weird thing. And then a lot of them were like, screw you, and then just went and joined TTP. So the weird part is Taliban does all these like really kind of racist things within Taliban ranks. Like even like in the north, there was Taliban who were kind of like ethnically like Uzbek or Tajik or something. The Taliban were like, I don't care if you've been Taliban for 20 years. Like, we're still taking your land. You're not like a Pashtun or whatever. So they do all these things. And so, yeah, so I guess Siraj thinks he answered the mail what Pakistan asked for, and I guess they're happy with it. But he just took weapons from like his own people that weren't TTP. So anyway, Siraj he's just playing all the sides, and I want to talk about the piece he plays with the United States.
Okay.
So his piece with the United States is really interesting. He's playing this ploy of, hey, we can't give women's education because Haibatullah and the Kandahari Taliban are in the way. The head of the Ministry of Education is a Haqqani, okay? Haqqanis can do whatever they want with the Ministry of Education. What they're focused on is these jihadi madrasas. So they have a $300 million budget to make all these jihadi madrasas, and they want to train like 500,000 students through these, right? That's their focus. Their focus is training this next generation of terrorists. They're leading the U.S. on, and then they're playing the women card to get as much as they can from the U.S., and then they're pushing it off. So finally, when they give some sort of crappy terrorist-led women education, it'll be enough, and we'll be exhausted by it, and everyone will be fine, and we'll tell the women of Afghanistan, just settle for that. So the U.S. is playing that piece, and Haqqani's playing that piece, and they're using Haqqani's brother, Anas Haqqani. He's kind of like the Jamie Lynn Spears to Siraj. He ain't a rock star. But he's where we have that relationship. And then remember I told you we play the Kandahari side of the Taliban, and on that side of the Taliban our relationships with Mullah Omar's son, Mullah Yaqub. But yeah, so Siraj has gotten really smart to play the women's education, and then our State Department's just falling for it. And then they're like, oh, Siraj is a better choice between the two Taliban sides because he believes in women's education. It's like, what? This is the suicide bomber guy. Like, none of these, there is no good Taliban, right? But our government, like, can't get over their, like, the Taliban sympathizers, they just need to, like, fire them or move them out. So, like, the rest of level-headed people can start making these decisions.
Moving on.
Yeah, so I think we're at Haibatullah. If I missed someone, sorry. So again, Haibatullah's head of the Taliban.
Okay.
So Haibatullah is making so much bank. Like, so this is several $1 million.
This is the guy double dipping.
That was a prime minister.
Okay.
This is the supreme religious leader.
Okay.
Like this is the Mullah Omar.
Gotcha.
Okay. So Haibatullah gets this from us. He gets a stipend from like the Iranians. He reportedly gets a stipend from the Russians. He gets money from the Indians, which actually maybe I should go off on. The Indian piece is really interesting. So he's getting all this money, and then he's kind of the controller of the Chinese money. And so the Chinese money is $10 billion of investments, okay? $10 billion. So the Chinese investments, as everyone knows, is kind of the minerals, the lithium, all the mines, whatnot. There's two really important pieces, though. One is of the $10 million, $3 of every $10 gets allocated to Al-Qaeda. So they get 30%. And so Al-Qaeda takes the money, and then they keep some for themselves, and then they give some to affiliates like the TTP and like IMU. That's the Islamic Movement of Uzbekistan, okay?
Okay.
And IMU is one of those groups. Remember when I told you all these terrorist groups are sending terrorists to the border? So it was Al-Qaeda. This is last time. Afghan Taliban, ISIS. IMU is another one of the terrorist groups sending terrorists to our southern border, just FYI. So just think about that. 3 of every $10. So $3 billion of that $10 billion went straight to Al-Qaeda off the top. So then the other part that totally gets forgotten, everyone's like, yeah, they want the lithium, blah, blah, blah. There's a whole different thing China cares about. China has made a deal with the Iranians. And the deal is basically if the U.S. comes to war with us in China and shit hits the fan, we're going to get oil from you. And so Afghanistan is actually going to be used as the land route for the Iranian oil because China's worried that U.S. are going to cut off the oil supplies that come from like South America or Africa. So now they're going to have a land route for the oil. So that's really key to understand. Like China has a bigger thing than I want to mine. And I think people are like losing thought of this. And then just as a funny thing, China decided Bagram is one of the more key strategic bases in the world. And now Bagram is where the Chinese PMCs are based. So, can I do India?
Let's do it.
I hate those people who do sidebars, but the India piece is so fascinating, and I kind of tripped over it. So, I was trying to find the U.S. money, but then there's all these other pots of money, right? And so then you're kind of like, okay, what's happening with them? So India does this thing where they give a little bit of money. So I told you how there's Mullah Yaqub, Mullah Omar's son. So he has another brother, Dawood. And India kind of works with Dawood, and they give him money. And it's just kind of like the little things they do with the Baluchis, like the Baluch Liberation Army, BLA, and TTP. And it's like the things they do to poke Pakistan. You know, that crap. Mm-hmm. So, so they have that going on, which I knew about. So then I hear, hey, they gave $10 million to Mullah Yaqub, so they went up a step. And then, so it's like, well, what's this $10 million for? What are they doing with it? The $10 million went to fund Gecko Base. You remember Gecko Base? I mean, I've never worked in Gecko Base.
But several times.
Yes. Yeah, so you know Gecko Base. I know some of your audience does. So Gecko Base now is the location where Haibatullah, so the supreme leader of the Taliban, that is where his personal security is. So then it's like, okay, the Indian government, or, probably their intel service, is funding Haibatullah's personal security. Now, isn't that weird?
Yeah.
So, of course, I'm like, this makes no sense. And it's not even tons of money compared to what we're putting in. So I have all these questions, okay? So it's like, what is India getting? And also, really, what's the Taliban getting? Because they don't give a damn about $10 million. So this is going to sound like the craziest thing ever, okay? But what the Indians and the Taliban are doing, I kid you not, is India is using Taliban's network to assassinate Kashmiri militants in Pakistan.
Are you serious?
I swear to God. Yeah, I know this leaves so many questions, but yeah, so they've been doing all these hits. So they've been killing all these Kashmiri militants. They've been killing a bunch of Sikh militants. I don't know anything about the Sikh part, so if anyone's interested in that part, I've only looked at the Kashmiri piece. So yeah, so they're using, they say the Taliban networks, and then they're doing these assassinations. They're happening all over Pakistan, like in Lahore and Karachi and etc. So then I was like, well, still, this is really risky for the Taliban if people find out, like it seems like it could rock the boat, like they're using their networks. Plus, are the Taliban networks that good to take out senior Kashmiri people? Maybe they're not. So the interesting part is now my theory is India gains what they're gained, right? These are terrorists that some of these guys they've wanted for 30 years, okay? I went through a list of 18 of them. So the interesting part is I don't know if they're all dead. Some of them, Pakistan could have heard India's coming to kill them and they might have them in a safe house. So there's 18 targeted, okay? And I went through all 18 to make sure I knew who they were, right? Because I've worked Kashmir forever, and to see what group they were. And so I went through all of them, and they were the groups you can imagine: Lashkar-e-Taiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed, Hezbollah Mujahideen. The last one was Al-Badr Mujahideen. Not one of the 18 were from Harakat ul-Mujahideen. This matters because Haibatullah, when he was young, he got his religious teaching from a guy named Fazl al-Rahman Khalil. He founded whom? They're still close friends, and some of the money that goes to Haibatullah from us, he gives to whom in their madrasas. So I have a theory. So the assassinations are happening, Taliban supporting. I have a theory. Taliban and whom have decided to work together to use India because they want it anyway. And they're bumping off the Kashmiri militants who are aligned to Pakistan. So the problem with the Kashmiri militants and why the Taliban can't use them, as you can imagine, is they're Pakistani nationalists, right? So there's a Fatah war plan, but in the future, there's the Kashmir war plan. But there's no potential of doing the Kashmir war plan anytime soon because all the leaders of the Kashmiri militant groups are aligned with Pakistan and Pakistan's military and Pakistan's ISI. Now, if you start taking out the old guard of leaders, which it seems like the Taliban and whom might be doing with India, but India doesn't actually understand that's what's happening and why they're invested in it. You take out the old guard, all the new guard of Kashmiri militants, after they trained in Kashmir, guess where they fought? In Afghanistan with the Taliban against Americans. The new generation of Kashmiri militants are more aligned to the Taliban and Al-Qaeda than they are to the Pak military. So they're creating this whole new Kashmir landscape that nobody has thought about and nobody's ready for, but it's going to be ready in the future when the war plan moves to Kashmir. The Taliban and Al-Qaeda have thought this far ahead.
Wow.
Is that crazy?
These guys are really strategic.
Yeah, like their plans are big, but their plans are long too. And we have people that work on something for a year. Like even this China, right? We have someone who works on an account for a year or two. China's thinking in like 100 years. Like we aren't prepared to like deal with the threats at the way they're doing it. So that's the end of the Taliban parts of the deliveries, and then we'll move to Al-Qaeda. And so every single delivery, except, one was a building, every single one of those deliveries, every one of those terrorists are sanctioned, and every delivery is against U.S. law. So then we move to Al-Qaeda. So the next delivery, like I told you, was Saif al-Adil. He runs the military commission of Al-Qaeda. He's also the de facto head of Al-Qaeda external operations, so he's planning all the attacks against us. And he's who the U.S. government lies and says is the head of Al-Qaeda. So even if they were right, which they're not, they're also still paying weekly the head of Al-Qaeda, which is a problem. Okay, you ready do you have any clue who the last three are at the last delivery?
Enlighten me.
Okay. They are the top three of Al-Qaeda. Any chance you know who the top three of Al-Qaeda are? Well, you know Hamza. I told you Hamza. Mm-hmm. So, okay. Number one is Hamza bin Laden, designated terrorist. They won't admit he's alive. Number two is Saad bin Laden. The deputy leader of Al-Qaeda is Saad bin Laden. So the top two heads of Al-Qaeda are bin Ladens. Do you have any idea the last name of the third guy?
Bin Laden.
Yes. The number three of the Taliban is Abdullah bin Laden. He's not even designated. So of every terrorist we delivered money to, he's the only one we legally can give money to. So yeah, please designate Abdullah bin Laden as a terrorist. So Hamza's running it, his deputy Saad, and then Abdullah's running kind of what would be if you were the COO of an organization. So he's running the business operations side of Al-Qaeda, and then Saif al-Adil is running the fighting operations side. So those are the 4 senior leaders of Al-Qaeda, and all 4 the U.S. money gets delivered to, U.S. dollars cash from our airplane deliveries.
Why has the U.S. been lying about Hazam's death?
Yeah, so basically with Hamza, no worries. I don't know why they're still lying, okay? And I'm going to be really honest. The people trying to get this information out, bad things happen to them. So long story short, the person who made sure the information got out in September 2021 that Hamza's alive, he has been captured, tortured, and killed by the Taliban, okay? So there's good people trying to get this information out on the Taliban, and they're dying for it, right? And we're still lying about who's heading the Taliban while people are dying trying to tell us. This is a huge problem. So I'm going to go back in time to when Hamza was reportedly dead, because I think that time frame is more important. So I'm going to do a lot of caveats on this, okay? So in 2019, Hamza bin Laden was reported as dead, okay, in a strike. 5 months later, reportedly, Afghan officials found out he didn't actually die, and they provided a picture to the U.S. government. Where that picture went, who it was shared with at the time, I don't know. The one thing I do know is, like I told you, when I stopped working Taliban in 2010, it was like the train left the station, Taliban reconciliation is happening, the State Department is going to make it happen at all costs. All the intel collect was focused on reconciliation, not the terrorist activities, et cetera, right? They were going to make reconciliation happen. There's one thing that can stop a peace deal or whatever, and that would be, as you can imagine, if it benefits the bin Ladens, right? It doesn't even matter if it was Trump. Obviously, it's Trump who did the deal. But any leader who shows up at 9/11, after the attacks is never going to make a deal with Al-Qaeda, right? So there's something about Hamza bin Laden that he was better dead. So I hate saying this because I honestly don't think the president knew, and it's going to be a big problem. So Hamza bin Laden has 4 wives, okay? Everybody knows the second wife. It was videoed. I told you it was Abu Muhammad al-Masri, remember, who's now the head of Al-Qaeda in Africa. He had a first wife he married just before her. Do you have any clue whose daughter she might be?
I don't.
Mullah Omar's.
No way.
So Hamza bin Laden is married to the wife of Mullah Omar. They've been married since he was 17 years old, 5 years after 9/11. So any peace deal with the Taliban was also a peace deal with the bin Ladens because they are married to each other. And it's worse. So Hamza does have a son a lot of people know about named Osama bin Laden. Everyone assumes Osama bin Laden is Miriam's son, so is Abu Muhammad's grandson. Osama bin Laden, the next heir to Al-Qaeda, is the grandson of Osama bin Laden and Mullah Omar. So our peace deal with the Taliban was with the bin Ladens. There was no way to give all these things to the Taliban and all this cash to the Taliban and it not also go to the bin Ladens because they're the same family. They don't just work together.
Can you go, just for the audience, can you refresh our memories on Abdullah Omar?
So Mullah Omar.
Yeah, Mullah Omar.
Very simple. You know how we talked about the first delivery, the Mohammed Awesome guy, the one has cancer? 6 of these men, way back in the day in the 90s, got together. They created the Taliban. The Taliban at the time was created for a reason that almost makes sense. So after the Mujahideen era and the Soviet war ended, like Afghanistan was just this criminal landscape, right? Nobody was in charge. There was no law and order. There was so much crime. And so these 6 men were like, we're going to create this thing, the Taliban, and we're going to bring law and order and safety and protect women. You know, they love saying protect women because you just want to lock them up. And so they created the Taliban. So Mullah Omar created the Taliban, and then obviously Mullah Omar is the person who then gave Osama bin Laden refuge in Afghanistan, and then of course that's where the 9/11 got planned out of Afghanistan.
Thank you. Man, it's this just keeps getting worse and worse.
Yeah, tell your president the truth. I think that should be rule 1.
Yeah, no kidding, right? So of the 3 bin Ladens that are in power, I guess is what we call it, right? What do you think their plans are for the U.S. or just in general?
I know. Well, so they do want to do something in retaliation for their father. I don't know what that is exactly. And then remember, they are intimately involved in the Syria and Iraq deployments, and then the Fatah war plan. That's them too. So, you know, that's the bin Ladens, that's the Taliban, that's Al-Qaeda in the Indo subcontinent, and then remember I told you that political party in Pakistan. So they're all in the same plan, and they're all on the same page. Now, the sons want to do some of the things their father did not do, right? So they want to create, as we've kind of discussed, a larger caliphate. They want to create an actual base in Africa and be successful with it, because Osama wanted to create, you know, a base in Libya, right? That's why that started, and the base started in Benghazi. That was Osama bin Laden's plan. A lot of people are confused by that. So they want to do the same, and that's why we think it's Mali is this next Al-Qaeda base they're trying to do. And then their father had this view of this Islamic army that we've talked about, you know, this idea of, hey, it's us against the West. It's Islamists' views against everyone, even like Muslims who aren't extreme, right? It's like we want an army and we want a united front that is like the terrorists. And we don't care if you're Sunni, if you're Shia, right? Like we want to bring together. We even want to bring ISIS in. So they've slowly been working on the relationships to form this Islamic army. You know, Bin Laden tried this in Benghazi, and it took a couple years to get running, so it was after he died, but it ended up being the Benghazi Revolutionary Shura Council is what it was called. And then they made a couple other branches, and then they tried again, and they did call it what they wanted to, the Islamic Army, and it was started in eastern Libya. The interesting part, it was the same, and then as things happened, the groups didn't stay together, it became ISIS, Al-Qaeda fought it, it became a nightmare. And then to be really interesting is the guys leading it, like, have disappeared. Like, Libyan National Army didn't kill them. Like, so I don't even know. So yeah, the Islamic Army guys from Darna, they're like in the wind. I don't even know where they are. And potentially, they weren't attackers, so I'm not following them, but potentially they could be in Afghanistan. But yeah, so there is this goal of this giant Islamic army of like-minded terrorist groups, but that's a longer out.
Do you think there's a big event planned, like September 11th?
I think the whatever is the plan for the. I do think there's some smaller things like the embassy things. I think whatever the Bin Ladens want for the father is probably going to be. They're gonna have to elevate it to that level, at least attempt to.
Yeah.
But they already have a win, right? I mean, they got Afghanistan. I know they want more for their father, right? But remember, the people who've come out of the last 20 years are the Bin Ladens.
Yeah.
They have more fighters now. They have more money now. They got a whole damn country. And the U.S. ignores them and won't even admit that they're there, that they're resurging. They won't even say who the leader is. Like, we basically cover for their activities, too. And we're even lying that they're the ones attacking us some of the times in Iraq and Syria. Isn't that crazy? Just like they lied about Al-Qaeda and Benghazi. Some of these attacks in Iraq and Syria, they're like, oh, it's Iranian proxies. No, some of those attacks are Al-Qaeda. You need to say, if they're Al-Qaeda, that they're Al-Qaeda.
I just
parents need to know
don't
this.
understand why they're covering for them, why we're financing them. I don't. Do you have any insight into that? Why? Why are
I
we
don't
doing
know.
this?
The State Department can barely run a embassy, and we have them running these big things. I have no idea. I think there's some terrorist sympathizing problem. I think there's incompetence. I think people are right that a lot of this money moving around becomes a little bit of money laundering, and people make money off of it. And that is an incentive, as you know, people care about money more than they care about their country, right? Sadly.
It's a real shame.
And people care about their politics a lot more than their country. And that's the problem we're in right now, right? No one will just be honest and say, this is wrong, fix it. It's like, well, if my party's doing it, maybe it's wrong, but at least it's my party, and that's better than someone else doing it, right?
Yeah. No,
it's insane.
That's what I was alluding to earlier when I was saying that I think I was talking about nobody taking accountability and making excuses for their political party, their favorite candidate, whatever it is. And it's, it really is. I mean, we're in a very divided country, but it's just both parties that are doing this.
Exactly.
Both,
they're benefiting by dividing us, and then we are participating in it every time we allude to it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
We're dying a hill for one of these losers who are representing us.
It's a real shame. How powerful is Al-Qaeda now in Afghanistan versus pre-9/11?
So Al-Qaeda is definitely more powerful now than 9/11. Is Al-Qaeda more powerful now than Al-Qaeda in Iraq was? I don't know, right? Because Al-Qaeda in Iraq got very powerful, and that was a huge resurgence. So, but they're gonna surpass that, right? Like that's their goal. So Al-Qaeda will be the biggest. It's bigger than it was in 9/11. It will be the biggest it's ever been in the next year. I have no doubts.
Man, I don't know what to say. You've dropped so much information here. It's like drinking from the fire hose, and it's alarming. It's enraging. I'm scared for our country. I'm very scared for our country.
I just find it frustrating that, we're the GWAT generation, right? We have people from our generation in Congress, and they're going to show up to work tomorrow, right? And be fine that this money's going to the Taliban. Like, what the hell are they doing? Like, do your damn jobs. Like, do the right thing. Like, you're an American. Stand up for American ideals. Like, we need to get back to being American. And it has to be our generation at this point, because our generation are becoming the leaders. You're the one that fought in these wars. You know exactly what we're talking about. You know exactly the people we're talking about. And you know exactly what funding them is going to do.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll see if that happens. More and more coming out, though, and are starting campaigns and are trying to get into government. It's unfortunately, you see a lot of them when they get in there and they get sucked right into the cesspool.
Yep.
And I've seen it firsthand, and it's a real shame.
We have a system where basically the person who can earn the most money for their party gets elected, right? So now they're in a position and they have so many IOUs, and it's just an unhealthy situation, right? Really, I do think there should be some sort of campaign finance laws, because you're never going to get the best person if you just get the best salesman or the best fundraiser, the best guy that'll like pat your back.
Yeah, very true. Very true. But, well, Sarah, before we wrap it up, is there anything else? Anything else at all?
Dude, there's so much in my head. If you want to get me going, we could go another 4 hours, but I don't know if either of us have the energy.
Man, I can't take any more. But well, hey, I just want to say thank you for coming back. And like I said, you are the most requested repeat guest we've ever had. And I know I'm going to see you again. And it sounds weird to say this. I can't wait to see what you drop next time. But
oh gosh, I don't want to drop anything. Yeah. I want people to go after these terrorists finally, so I can retire. I'm getting old too.
What is the number one request? Here's a question.
Sure.
This is a great one to end with. What is the number one request
from our allies, the resistance? What do they want the U.S. to do?
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. I thought when I went to ask them, so obviously I had to reach out to a lot of people to understand the money thing. And so I asked all of them this question, right? And I thought a lot of them would say air support or something like that. And every single person I talked to in the resistance all had the exact same answer. Stop the U.S. money going to the Taliban. Period. And we should just stop it anyway. Ethically, we are funding Al-Qaeda. We are funding the Taliban. We are funding TTP. We are funding people who have Americans stuck in basements. Like, this is insanity.
Yeah.
Besides what they're doing to the women, we haven't even talked about the women, but, you know, the Afghan women are living in a prison. They have zero rights. We promise them you're going to be doctors and lawyers. When Afghanistan fell, 27% of their parliament was women. United States is 29%. They got to a point in 20 years, equal par to us, right? And then we are doing nothing for their women, just like we did nothing for the women of Iran. And it's against all human rights thoughts like you could even imagine.
Yeah. Well, Sarah, like I said, I really appreciate it. It's an honor to have you here again. And one more time for the audience, check out the Shawn Ryan Show newsletter. Sarah will be giving us an intel brief.
Yes.
So,
and don't forget Benghazi, Know Thy Enemy,
exactly.
The best book on terrorism to ever be written.
And that'll be linked in the description below, and that'll be in the newsletter too.
Yes.
So, all right, Sarah, thank you so much.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
No matter where you're watching Shawn Ryan Show from, if you get anything out of this, please like, comment, subscribe, and most importantly, share this everywhere you possibly can. And if you're feeling extra generous, please leave us a review on Apple and Spotify podcasts.